Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into the frozen frontier, where your breath lifts in pale ribbons and the horizon looks like it forgot to thaw. You stand at the edge of a settlement that has not yet earned the word town, a scattered cluster of rough cabins bent like stubborn shoulders against the wind. The cold bites fast. You feel it in your fingertips, in the back of your throat, in that thin place behind your eyes that always aches when winter digs in. Out here, in the Wild West, winter is not a season, it is an opponent. And as you take your first step into this world, you already sense that you probably will not survive this without a few tricks the early settlers had to learn the hard way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to help me drift a little deeper into the nighttime atmosphere, tell me your location and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights and follow me into the cold. You trudge across ground as stiff as hammered iron, feeling each footstep echo upward into your ankles. The settlement around you is barely more than a promise. A few cabins lean at awkward angles, their logs irregular and hastily shaped. Settlers often built fast in their first year, shaping shelter before shaping comfort. That is your world now, a place born of haste and hope, and not much else. One mainstream fact you might already know is that most frontier cabins were built in a single frantic season, the goal simply to stand against storms long enough to get through the first winter. If the structure was still upright in spring, it was considered a triumph. You step closer to one of these cabins. The scent of fresh-cut pine lingers even through the cold. The logs are chinked with a mixture of mud, straw, moss, and whatever else could be scraped together. Everything looks temporary, but then again, so did most things out here. As you rest your hand on a log, you feel how imperfectly it fits the next, with a narrow seam that will let in more wind than anyone wants to admit. Quirky as it sounds, some settlers stuffed bits of old clothing into those gaps, an improvised insulation that historians still puzzle over. Historians still argue whether this habit came from European folk practices or was simply born of desperation in the moment. You push open the rough door and feel a burst of stale warmth, the kind that smells faintly of smoke and boiled beans. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim room. Inside, everything is arranged around a single objective: surviving the night. The hearth glows with a few tired coals, barely warm enough to take the edge off the freezing air. Someone sits by the fire, half asleep yet determined not to let the embers go out. Maintaining heat was a communal duty here. If one person drifted off for too long, the entire household could wake to frost on their blankets and ice in their hair. You shrug deeper into your coat and let your eyes roam around the interior. There are no polished floors or finished walls. The ceiling beams are raw and uneven. The floor is packed earth that sends cold upward like an unwanted message. A few iron tools hang on nails hammered straight into the logs, trembling slightly whenever the wind slams against the outside walls. In one corner, piled like a miniature hill, is a mound of firewood. Settlers knew that gathering wood in winter was risky business, so they stacked it high before the first snow arrived. Running out could be deadly during a cold snap. The room teaches you, even before anyone says a word, that every item inside is part of the fight against the cold. A child sleeps on a narrow bunk filled with straw, wrapped in a quilt that looks handmade. You step closer and see the quilting stitches, uneven but careful, tiny pieces of scrap fabric sewn together into warmth. Some patterns resemble ones you might still find in museum collections today. Your breath creates a thin fog as you exhale, showing just how cold the room still is. Even with a fire, most cabins remained frigid. People slept fully dressed, sometimes with their boots on. It sounds dramatic, but it was simply practical. Any exposed skin froze quickly. Someone calls you over to a spot near the hearth. You sit, warming your hands. The heat spreads slowly, seeping into your fingers with a kind of aching relief. The fire crackles weakly, and you can almost hear the cabin walls shift, reacting to the temperature. A quirky custom you may not have heard of involved singing soft songs while tending the fire at night, partly to stay awake, and partly to chase away loneliness. Some settlers believed that fire listened, and that a gentle voice kept it alive. Whether that was superstition or exhaustion talking, historians still debate, but the image feels fitting in this quiet room. You close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. The wind outside sounds like a living thing brushing its claws across the roof. Snow slides from branches and lands with soft thumps. Somewhere in the distance, something howls. Maybe a wolf. Maybe only the wind. You find yourself leaning closer to the fire, without realizing it, seeking that fragile warmth. Your hosts show you the corner where you will sleep tonight. It is not a bed, not in the way you imagine a bed. It is a narrow platform of wood topped with straw and covered with a heavy blanket, made from rough fabric and bison hide. It smells smoky, earthy, and distinctly animal, a combination that settles oddly in your lungs but signals real warmth. You run your hand along the hide, feeling the coarse fur that once belonged to a creature that roamed these plains long before cabins arrived. Frontier settlers often relied on buffalo robes in winter because wool blankets simply were not enough. According to some accounts, they were so warm that people woke sweating even in sub-zero nights, though that depended entirely on how the cabin was built and how fierce the weather turned. You lie down, testing the bedding. The straw underneath pokes a little, shifting with each movement. The blanket is heavy, almost too heavy, pressing against your chest in a comforting but slightly suffocating way. As you settle, you feel the cold seeping through the floor beneath you. Settlers sometimes laid down evergreen branches to add insulation under bedding, a trick borrowed from indigenous groups who knew the land long before newcomers arrived. Without such measures, the cold radiated upward all night, chilling even the toughest sleepers. The fire pops, sending a tiny spark across the hearth before it dies. Someone stirs the coals again, coaxing another faint glow to life. The room dips into dimness for a moment, then brightens slightly, and you lie there, watching that glow dance along the walls, casting trembling shadows that almost look like figures moving in the corners. Tallow candles sit unlit nearby, saved for emergencies. Candles were precious, nights were long, and everyone feared running out. Your breath grows softer, slower. Your body feels heavy on the straw bed. The cold still wraps itself around you, but the buffalo hide pushes back, creating a bubble of warmth. In this small, imperfect cabin, under a roof assembled in a rush, you experience the same mixture of fear, fatigue, and grit that defined the earliest winters in the Wild West. You drift, but the story continues. You wake before dawn, not because you slept well, but because the cabin walls groan like a living thing when the temperature drops. The sound nudges you out of a half-dream and into the frigid air, colder now that the fire has slumped into tired ash. You pull the buffalo hide closer, feeling its bulk trap what little warmth your own body managed to generate. As the first weak grey light seeps through the gaps in the log walls, you already understand why most settlers built their cabins quickly and with almost frantic determination. The cold does not wait politely for anyone. You rise slowly, joints stiff from the straw mattress. Each movement makes the dry stalks beneath you shift and crackle. The floor feels as hard and cold as a stone cellar, and a light dusting of icy rime sparkles along the edges of the room. You watch your breath leave your mouth in short white puffs. This is your world now, a place where every morning is a reminder that survival is a full-time occupation. The structure around you looks rough from the inside too, exactly as it did from the outside last night, logs stacked quickly, notched together with just enough precision to hold. One mainstream historical fact is that many frontier settlers constructed these cabins in only a few days, relying on neighbors in a cooperative effort called a raising, where everyone worked fast before storms rolled in. You step toward the door, touching the cold iron latch, and feel how fragile the entire building suddenly seems. You can spot tiny fractures in the chinking where the wind pressed hardest overnight, and you imagine cold air swirling through while you slept, searching your blankets for weakness. Some cabins were so poorly sealed that families stuffed rags or dried grass into the cracks every night, trying to buy themselves a little extra warmth until they could make better repairs. A quirky little practice involved using cattail fluff mixed with mud for chinking, mostly because it was surprisingly insulating and easy to gather when the marshes had not yet frozen solid. Historians still argue whether this was adopted from local tribes or simply invented through improvisation. When you push open the door, the morning slaps you with a fresh reminder of where you are. The cold is not merely cold, it is an entire presence, a thing that presses against your skin with a kind of stern warning. You step outside onto the snow-covered ground and hear it crunch beneath your boots. The cabin looks even rougher from this angle than it did last night. No paint, no ornament, nothing but raw wood peeled from trees only weeks or months before. Smoke rises in a thin line from a few chimneys nearby, too faint to suggest much warmth inside. As you walk a short circle around the cabin, you notice how the logs shrink slightly in winter, creating new gaps. The settlers could not wait for the wood to dry before building, so it shrank in place, creating problems they had to solve as they went. Your fingers brush over one seam, and you feel the wind push through as if the cabin were trying to whisper back at you. The cold here is a persistent tutor, reminding you that this settlement is still young, still vulnerable, still fighting to earn a place on the map. You duck back inside and close the door quickly. The interior feels slightly warmer, only because the outside was so brutally sharp. Someone is already crouched at the hearth, coaxing flames back to life with a few shavings of kindling. The smell of smoke thickens the air in a comforting way. Watching them, you understand why surviving winter required constant attention. Let the fire die completely, and you spend the next hour or more battling frozen fingers to relight it. Through the haze, you hear a soft rustle from the sleeping platform across the room. Another family member stirs, wrapped entirely in blankets like a cocoon, their breath fogging the air above them. Cabins like this often housed large families in small spaces. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Everyone slept in the same room, ate in the same room, worked in the same room, and tried not to get on each other's nerves. But winter had a way of amplifying every discomfort. The darkness lasted long, the wind pressed in from every direction, and the constant threat of illness loomed. You find yourself imagining how many nights settlers spent listening to a child cough or a parent shiver, wondering whether the home would hold. Someone offers you a tin cup of warm water heated near the fire. The metal is dented, probably shaped by hand from available scraps. You hold it close and watch the steam curl upward. It smells faintly of iron and wood smoke. You sip and feel that first thin thread of warmth slide down your throat. In the corner, you notice tools arranged neatly. An axe, a saw, a mallet, and a few nails hammered into the logs for hanging storage. You also see a small bundle of green pine boughs resting near the straw mattress. Settlers sometimes used pine needles to freshen bedding or scatter across the floor for insulation. A strange yet charming tidbit is that some families believed that pine boughs kept out evil spirits during the long nights. Historians still wonder whether this belief came from European folklore or was shaped by local customs absorbed during the expansion westward. You glance upward at the roof beams. They are thick but not evenly sized. You can tell they were felled and shaped quickly. The roof overhead is layered with simple shingles or even bark. Snow weighs heavily on it, and you hear an occasional groan as the timber shifts. On especially stormy nights, settlers feared collapse, and it was common to wake every hour to brush snow off or check for leaks. You imagine yourself lying awake, listening for the first sign of cracking wood, the way someone might listen for thunder before a storm. Breakfast is simple, if breakfast can even be called that. Last night's beans warmed in the same pot that cooked dinner, a piece of cornbread, dried beyond softness. Hunger was a regular visitor in winter, and food had to stretch. You eat while standing near the fire, letting its fragile heat soak into your legs. Outside, the settlement begins to stir. Doors open. People step out. Their movements are slow, tired, but determined. You see a neighbor carry a bucket of water that is already forming ice on its rim. Another leads a horse from a small shed, breath misting heavily in the cold. It strikes you how much life continued, even when the weather seemed intent on stopping everything. The Wild West demanded effort at all hours. You step back inside and close the door, realizing that the cabin, rough as it is, still represents safety. Last night it stood between you and the unforgiving elements. Tonight it will do the same. And as the fire brightens and spreads its warmth into the room, shadows soften and tension loosens from your shoulders. You begin to understand the settlers more deeply. Their cabins were not perfect, they were not comfortable, but they were hope carved into wood. You settle for a moment near the bunk where you slept, feeling the straw shift beneath your hand again. You remember the cold seeping up from the earthen floor, reminding you that insulation was always a work in progress. Settlers often added new layers of mud or animal hides to block drafts as winter continued. Some even slept with dogs for extra warmth, a surprisingly effective method that modern studies confirm. Though historians still debate whether this habit was common practice or simply something families avoided admitting, the idea does not seem unreasonable after a night like the one you just lived. You look around the cabin one more time, absorbing the textures, the smells, the sounds. This place is crude, but it is also alive. Every log carries the imprint of a human hand. Every seam in the walls tells a story about time, weather, and persistence. Every morning begins the same way, with the fire being coaxed from ember to flame, and the family breathing steam into the air. And as you stand there, breathing your own little puffs of fog, you feel the cold waiting just outside the door, patient and relentless, ready for tonight. You stay close to the fire for a long moment, letting its warmth soak into your skin, but sooner or later you have to move. The day demands chores, and the cabin demands repairs. As you shift your weight, you feel the sting of cold radiating from the floor again, a steady reminder that many early settlers spent their first winters sleeping directly on earth. Earthen floors were not a charming rustic feature. They were simply what you had when you built fast. You step across the packed dirt and feel how uneven it is beneath your boots, some places harder than others, some still holding tiny grains of frost that sparkle like crushed glass in the morning light. You crouch down to study the floor more closely. It feels ancient, even though it is newly made, as if every footstep presses history deeper into it. A mainstream fact that surprises many people is that most early frontier cabins did not have proper flooring for months, sometimes years. Lumber required time, tools, and often a sawmill that might be miles away. So families slept on straw laid directly over earth. It was practical, but it was not comfortable. You can almost imagine waking in the night to the sound of tiny creatures skittering beneath the bedding or feeling moisture creep upward during a thaw. As you walk, each step releases a faint, earthy smell, mixed with smoke from the hearth and hints of last night's stew. The scent feels strangely grounding, but there is more going on than meets the eye. A quirky detail from frontier life is that some settlers sprinkled powdered lime across the floor to keep insects away and to dry up spills or mud tracked inside. A thin dusting of white powder helped maintain some sense of cleanliness in an environment where nature constantly tried to reclaim every surface. Historians still dispute whether this practice was widely adopted or just a regional trick, but the idea of a frontier homemaker trying everything to make life a bit easier seems entirely believable as you stand there inhaling the scents of wood and dirt. You straighten, listening for the sounds outside. Wind pushes through the cracks again, even in daylight. The cabin walls pop lightly, as though reacting to each gust. Inside, despite the fire, your breath still fogs. You notice the thin shimmer of frost crawling along the lower edges of the walls, forming faint patterns like ghostly lace. Sleeping in a place like this meant accepting that you would never truly escape the cold. You only learn to fight it. You reach out and place your palm against the interior log wall. It feels colder than stone. The wood is not finished or sanded. It is rough, uneven, and splintered in places. Settlers often rushed construction before winter fully closed in. Logs were shaped with axes and adzes, not planed smooth. You imagine the builders working late into the evening, hands blistered, breath steaming, racing against the season. The result is exactly what you see around you. A cabin that stands, but not comfortably, not confidently. The walls hold back the wind, but only just. Your fingers trace one of the seams between the logs, and you sense how fragile the insulation really is. Mud and straw stuffed into the gaps crack easily in freezing weather. Sometimes chunks fall out overnight. Families kept baskets of patching material nearby, ready to restuff holes whenever light streamed through where it should not. You picture a tired settler waking in the dark, pressing handfuls of moss or old cloth into the opening, while cold air nips at their knuckles. Survival was not a grand, heroic act. It was this constant maintenance, done quietly and repeatedly. You wander toward the corner where you slept last night and sit down, sinking slightly into the straw. It rustles under you, a dry, whispering sound. Your blanket still smells like smoke, and the bison hide still carries the faint scent of the animal it once belonged to. You shift, trying to find a comfortable spot, and feel a sharp stalk poke your shoulder. Straw bedding was notorious for this. Settlers often discovered twigs, burrs, or even the occasional beetle mixed into their mattresses. A fringe bit of lore says some people added dried herbs like mint or lavender to mask the odors and discourage pests. Historians still question how common this aromatic practice was, but as you lean back and inhale, you can imagine someone tossing a handful of herbs into the mix, simply out of wishful thinking. You lie down again, as if testing the bed with fresh morning judgment. The straw rustles, and the cold from the floor rises gently into your spine. It is not unbearable, but it is persistent. Settlers sometimes elevated beds using simple frames, even just a few wooden planks supported by stumps or rocks, anything to get a little distance from the frozen earth. Others laid down animal skins beneath their bedding for extra insulation. You can almost hear a settler mumbling about how one good hide could save you from a week of shivering. In the dim light, you notice the cabin interior more clearly now. The single room feels like a living diary of survival. Every object has a purpose. A tin lantern sits near the door. A small box of flint and steel rests on a shelf. A line of drying herbs hangs from a ceiling beam, their curled leaves rattling lightly when the wind shakes the cabin walls. You wonder what stories these dried plants carry. Perhaps they flavored stews. Perhaps they soothed a cough. Perhaps they simply reminded someone of a home left far behind. You shift onto your side, letting the rough texture of the bison hide brush against your cheek. The faint warmth it absorbs from your body feels like a comforting promise. But soon your eyes drift to the ceiling, where the beams hold tiny icicles along their edges, melted and refrozen through the night. You imagine them dropping onto your face at any moment. In many cabins, families reported waking to frost, forming on blankets, hair freezing slightly, where breath condensed. The idea sounds almost unbelievable until you see how thin the walls are, how easily the cold invades. You rise from the bed and walk once more toward the small window opening. It is just a square cut into the logs, covered with oiled cloth instead of glass. Light filters through softly, but the cloth stiffens in winter, making the cabin dim and shadow-filled even at midday. You press your fingertips against the fabric and feel how it ruffles in the breeze. Settlers learn to reinforce their windows with extra cloth or even small wooden shutters, anything to cut down the drafts. As you stand there, watching daylight seep through the cloth, you feel the weight of the season settle in again. Nights here are long, days are short, and in this cabin, with its earthen floor that grows cold enough to crack, with its walls that tremble under the wind, with its bedding that rustles and pokes, you understand that every moment of rest must be earned. You move back to the fire and stir it gently, lifting sparks into the air. They shimmer briefly before fading. The sound of crackling wood fills the room, a soft hum that works its way through your bones. As warmth spreads, slow and uneven, the cabin feels almost like a friend, not a gentle one, but one who has stood beside you through the night. And as the fire breathes its fragile heat, you settle back, knowing this place will test you again tonight. But for now, the morning belongs to you. You settle deeper into the morning rhythm of the cabin, tugging your coat a little tighter as another gust of cold air slips in through the seams. The fire crackles faintly, giving off a warmth that feels more symbolic than powerful, and you find yourself drawn toward the bedding piled near the corner. Today, you will learn how settlers relied on buffalo robes and any scrap of warmth they could gather, because when winter locked its jaw around the plains, comfort was not a luxury. It was a tactic. You kneel beside a thick buffalo hide draped over the straw mattress, noticing how heavy it is even before you lift it. The fur is coarse beneath your fingers, still carrying the faint scent of smoke and tallow. You pull it up, feeling its tremendous weight. According to one well-regarded frontier account, hunters regularly described buffalo robes as the warmest natural covering available in the West, often prized more than woven blankets because wool simply could not match the insulation. You can see why the moment you press the robe around your shoulders, it traps heat with surprising loyalty, forming a cocoon of warmth even in the half-frozen air of the cabin. As you inhale the earthy scent of the robe, you notice another layer folded underneath, a patchwork of old cloth squares stitched together in an uneven quilt. It carries its own story, sewn by tired hands around a dim hearth, each piece cut from worn-out garments too precious to throw away. Quilts like this existed everywhere on the frontier, but each one looked different, reflecting the life of the family that made it. Some frontier diaries mention families sewing into the night during storms, stitching with stiff fingers while snow battered the walls outside. You spread the quilt and see small repairs everywhere, tiny patches sewn over thin spots, mismatched thread loops, and random scraps filling gaps as needed. And then you notice something more unusual. Along the edges, a narrow cord of dried sage is stitched between the layers. A curious detail from frontier households reveals that some settlers believed aromatic herbs inside bedding helped repel insects and also brought a sense of calmness during long, anxious nights. Whether it truly worked or simply gave people something hopeful to believe in, no one can say for certain. You pull the buffalo robe aside and sit on the straw mattress. The moment your weight settles, a familiar crackle greets your ears. You can feel the uneven clumps beneath, where straw gathered more densely in some spots and thinned out in others. You try shifting your hips, then your shoulder, but the lumps persist. This was normal. Straw mattresses needed constant fluffing or replacing, otherwise they collapsed into rough mounds. Still, they offered essential insulation, and people learned to adjust their sleeping positions over time. You lie back, letting the robe fall across your chest. A thick warmth spreads through you, and even though the cold air still tingles against your nose, the heavy hide shields you from the worst of it. The sensation almost tricks your body into forgetting that frost is forming again near the window. You hear someone outside calling to a neighbor. Their voices carry through the thin cabin walls, merging with the whistle of the wind. You listen while resting your hands on the soft fur. The sounds of daily chores blend into a quiet hum. Even the distant clank of a metal pail being set down feels like part of a long, slow song the settlement sings each morning. A strange memory from frontier lore comes to mind. Travelers often wrapped heated stones inside buffalo robes before sleeping, hoping the warmth would last until dawn. It sounds clever, but some accounts mention that a few people accidentally scorched their bedding when the stones were too hot. You imagine someone half asleep, waking to the smell of smoldering fur and scrambling to beat out a small flame with numbed hands. Yet such improvisations were necessary. Frontier nights forced creativity, even risky creativity. As you stretch your legs and adjust the robe, you scan the cabin. The fire has grown brighter now, its orange glow licking the soot-darkened stones around it. A pot hangs suspended above the coals, releasing the faint aroma of boiling grains. The warmth coils upward and swirls faintly in the cold air, creating a soft haze that makes the entire room feel dreamlike. It gives the illusion of comfort, as if the cabin suddenly remembered how to be gentle. Your eyes drift back to the pile of blankets. Beside the buffalo hide lies a coarse woolen covering, one that looks scratchy enough to irritate your skin, but it is thick and sturdy. It carries the muted scent of lanolin and age. Settlers layered whatever they had: robes, quilts, hides, sacks, woven coverings, even spare coats. The goal was simple: create as many barriers as possible between skin and cold. There is another curious object tucked into the bedding, a small cloth bag tied with a leather cord. You pick it up, feeling something soft and grainy inside. When you loosen the tie, you catch a faint whiff of dried grass and crushed leaves. It appears to be a stuffing mix of prairie hay and dried flowers. A few regional histories mention that some settlers filled small bags with dried plants and used them as makeshift pillows. Whether it made sleeping more comfortable or just slightly less uncomfortable is up for interpretation, but it adds another layer of humanity to the harsh environment. As you set the bag down, you let your gaze wander back to the window. The morning light has grown stronger, turning the oiled cloth into a pale yellow square. Tiny crystals have formed along the edges where the cold clings stubbornly. When you run your fingertips lightly along the frame, you feel icy droplets trembling there, ready to melt or freeze again depending on the fire's strength. This contrast between doom and comfort defines every winter night on the frontier. A robe meant survival. A quilt carried memory. A straw mattress offered insulation, though imperfect. And the cabin walls held everything together with a quiet defiance, even when the cold tried to force its way inside. As you lie there beneath the buffalo hide, warmth slowly tracing its way across your chest, you imagine how settlers ended their days, perhaps sitting just like this, stretched out after hours of labor, grateful for small comforts. Perhaps they whispered stories about the plains, memories of homes left behind, or hopes for spring. Perhaps they listened to the wind and wondered whether tomorrow would be kinder. You shift slightly, pulling the robe higher, and feel the heaviness settle more comfortably. In that moment, with the fire gently crackling and the morning light spreading softly through the cloth window, you catch the faintest sense of why they endured. Not because it was easy, but because warmth, however small, felt like victory. And tonight, when the cold deepens again, you will reach for these layers the same way they did. You shift away from the fire and stretch your arms, feeling the lingering warmth drift from your skin as the cabin exhales another thread of cold. The day outside grows brighter, but it does little to soften the air inside. Your breath still fogs faintly. As you prepare for another taste of frontier life, someone gestures you toward the sleeping area again. Not to rest, but to understand how crowded nights became when survival demanded shared warmth. You walk across the uneven floor, feeling it creak softly beneath your boots, and sit near the straw bedding. The idea of sharing a bed with others might feel awkward to your modern sensibilities. Yet on the frontier, it was ordinary, necessary. Families, hired hands, travelers, and sometimes even a stranger caught out after sunset all found themselves pressed together under the same pile of hides. According to one widely referenced cabin diary from the era, entire families often slept shoulder to shoulder, lined up the way spoons rest together in a drawer. It was not sentimental, it was insulation. You imagine lying here at night, arms pinned, someone's breath brushing your cheek, the scent of sweat and smoke mingling with damp wool. In winter, heat was currency, and the human body was a precious furnace. Even children were encouraged to sleep close to adults to keep temperatures up, and if a traveller staggered into the settlement late in the evening, shivering and exhausted, there was little question about where they would sleep. Hospitality was not just kindness, it was mutual survival. You reach beneath the bedding and feel the rough, cold wood of the platform beneath the straw. You picture 3, maybe 4 people side by side here, adjusting their legs awkwardly, negotiating for space, ignoring elbows and knees. A curious anecdote from Frontier Letters mentions that visitors sometimes apologized in advance before climbing into a shared bed, warning others that they moved in their sleep or snored loudly. No one minded. In this world, warmth mattered more than manners. You settle onto the straw again, stretching your legs as if trying to claim a spot before the nighttime crowd arrives. The chill from the earthen floor pushes upward, but you pull a buffalo robe over your lap and instantly feel the difference. Even shared warmth needed help from fur and wool. You picture children tugging blankets to their chins, parents adjusting layers over them, and the entire room falling quiet, except for the fire's crackle and the occasional shifting of bundled bodies. As you rest there, you catch the scent of wood smoke clinging to the bedding. It wraps around you like a second layer, reminding you that even though multiple people slept here, the fire still fought for dominance against the cold. The logs stacked nearby testify to the nightly struggle. Each piece represents careful planning and many hours of chopping. The more bodies in a bed, the fewer logs needed through the darkest hours. That logic shaped sleeping arrangements more than comfort ever could. You move slightly to your right, imagining another person lying there. You feel how the straw dips where the mattress has been worn down by repeated bodies. A second shift to your left reveals another spot worn smooth by time. These impressions shape a story without words, a map of countless nights endured together. One particularly interesting frontier recollection describes how parents often placed the youngest children between adults, creating a warm core at the center of the bedding. Whether this was universal or just a regional practice remains the subject of occasional academic debate, but the idea makes sense as you imagine small, cold hands warming between larger ones. You lift the robe and settle it around your shoulders, pressing into the straw. As you breathe slowly, the air near the bedding warms just enough to soften the chill nipping at your ears. Your body heat, faint as it is, becomes part of the room's equilibrium. Now imagine doubling it, tripling it, filling the space with shared warmth. You begin to understand why settlers accepted crowded beds without complaint. Still, the arrangement was not always harmonious. There were stories of nighttime disputes told in quiet laughter across the frontier. Someone hogging the blanket, someone kicking involuntarily, someone whispering or muttering in their sleep, and always the fear of a cold draft sneaking into the bundle when someone rolled over too enthusiastically. Despite these annoyances, people bore with one another, because the alternative was far worse. You shift again, settling deeper into the robe, and hear the low murmur of voices outside. The day is underway. But at night, these sounds would be replaced by the rhythmic breathing of those packed beside you. Perhaps a dog curled at someone's feet, adding its own warmth. Some families welcomed animals into bed for exactly that reason, though not everyone admitted it. A few frontier accounts hint sheepishly that a dog or goat might have been the real hero of winter nights. Whether this was a widespread habit, or just a practical choice made by a handful of struggling households, remains unresolved among those who study early rural lifeways. You pick up one of the quilts, letting the fabric fold across your lap. It is uneven but sturdy. The stitches vary in size, telling you that several hands likely contributed to its making. A mother, a sister, perhaps even a neighbor during a communal sewing evening. In a place where privacy was scarce, collaboration shaped even the bedding. You imagine the conversations that accompanied those stitches. News from distant towns, gossip from the nearest trading post, plans for spring planting, worries about illness creeping through nearby cabins. As the quilt settles around you, the room feels slightly smaller, as if the memories of past sleepers linger in the fibers. You press your palm to the blanket and sense the faint warmth gathering there. It is gentle, subtle, comforting. You picture winter nights when the wind screamed outside and frost clawed at the shutters. And yet inside, a pile of bodies under layers of blankets created a small haven. Shared beds were not just spaces for rest. They were fortresses against the cold. They were the meeting point of necessity and resilience. They were the unspoken agreement that everyone inside these walls depended on one another to greet the next sunrise. You lie back one more time, tucking the robe at your sides, feeling how the bedding adapts to you. In a few moments, you rise again to face the rest of the day. But for now, you accept the truth the settlers knew all too well. If you were alone in a bed like this, winter might win. But pressed together, with warmth multiplying through the night, you might actually make it through. You step away from the shared bedding and move toward the hearth, drawn by its soft glow, even though the fire is still small and half asleep. The fireplace is the heart of the cabin, but this heart beats weakly, fighting the cold with whatever strength a few chunks of wood can offer. You kneel beside it, feeling the faint warmth brush your knuckles, and you already sense why settlers spent half their winter nights tending flames that refused to cooperate. You pick up the poker and nudge the coals. A faint puff of ash rises, drifting like grey snow before settling again. In one of the most frequently referenced frontier journals, a homemaker wrote that she sometimes woke 6 times a night just to keep the fire alive. Without constant attention, even the best-built hearth lost heat quickly. Chimneys were often crude, made from stacked stones sealed with mud. Smoke sometimes leaked back into the room, stinging the eyes and settling into blankets. But families endured it because the alternative was a cabin colder inside than outside. You add a piece of firewood to the embers and listen to the slow, reluctant sizzle as frost melts from the bark. The logs pop sharply, sending tiny sparks upward. The flame struggles at first, hesitating as if deciding whether to bother. You lean closer, warming your face, inhaling that raw mix of pine resin and smoke. It is a scent that defined winter life here, seeping into hair, clothes, and bedding until everything carried the same frontier perfume. Behind you, a draft sweeps through the room, lifting the ends of the quilts and making the fire flicker sideways. You glance toward the door and see the leather hinge strap flapping slightly. The wind outside seems determined to reclaim the warmth you coaxed from the hearth. Some early settlers tried hanging heavy blankets across their doorframes to block drafts, while others built small entry vestibules called windbreaks. Whether these tactics were inherited from European building traditions or invented independently on the frontier remains a point of quiet disagreement among architectural historians. You reach for a handful of kindling and arrange it carefully. The flame brightens, crawling slowly along the dry splinters. Soon, the fire begins to breathe with more confidence, though it still feels fragile. You watch as the orange glow rolls across the stones surrounding the hearth, revealing dark streaks of soot from months of use. A curious bit of household lore tells of families collecting soot from chimneys to use as pigment for homemade ink. The idea sounds improbable at first, but several old letters bear the faint brownish tint of smoke-based writing, a reminder that nothing went to waste out here. You sit back on your heels, palms open to the warmth. Even with the fire strengthening, the temperature inside the cabin barely shifts. The logs that form the walls hold the cold like a memory. Your breath still forms faint clouds. You adjust your coat, draw your collar higher, and glance upward. The chimney leans slightly to one side, and gaps between the stones let slivers of light peek through. The draft it creates is unstable, causing the flames to dance and sputter unpredictably. A sudden gust from outside makes the fire pull sharply inward, then push outward again, sending a thin stream of smoke curling into the room. You cough softly, waving it away. Poorly built chimneys often smoked like this, irritating eyes and lungs, especially for children trying to sleep nearby. You imagine lying in bed, breathing through a blanket, eyes half opened against the sting. Many frontier illnesses worsened during winter because people spent long, smoky nights in cramped quarters. You add one more piece of wood, and for a moment, the fire roars as if encouraged. The bright flare warms your face, bringing relief that spreads down your neck and chest. You close your eyes, savoring it, but the warmth fades quickly once you lean away. This too was part of winter life, fleeting comfort. A fireplace warmed only those sitting directly beside it, leaving corners of the room untouched by heat. In fact, a widely circulated building guide of the time, explained that fireplaces lost more heat up the chimney than they gave to the room, yet they were the only option settlers had. You stand and walk slowly along the wall nearest the hearth. Your hand brushes over the logs, each one cool to the touch, despite the raging flame only a few feet away. You picture children asleep on straw mattresses farther from the fire, wrapped tightly in layers of quilts, their faces chilled by the air, while their backs pressed against warm bodies beside them. In a place like this, distance from the hearth mattered more than any other detail of the night. You return to the fire and lift the iron kettle that hangs over the coals. It is warm, but not dangerously hot. The water inside trembles softly. You set it aside on a stone to cool and notice how the vapor rises in thin ribbons. The smell of scalded metal mixes with the wood smoke, a harsh but familiar scent. While the kettle rests, you take a moment to sit directly in front of the flames, letting the warmth soak into your legs. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, imagining how many settlers spent their early morning hours exactly like this. As you listen to the fire, you recall stories of families using dried animal dung when wood supplies ran low. That fuel burned surprisingly well, though it carried a distinct scent that clung stubbornly to everything in the cabin. Some historians believe this practice was more common in treeless regions, where pioneers had no choice, while others argue it was used far more widely than records admit. The truth might sit somewhere between the two perspectives, but as you look at the modest pile of firewood near the wall, you can imagine someone turning to any workable fuel when the winter deepened. The flame steadies at last, glowing warmly against the interior. You lean slightly closer, palms out, and feel the heat spreading through your fingertips, finally strong enough to chase away the ache settling into your knuckles. The fireplace is no modern heater. It is stubborn, unpredictable, and often insufficient. But in this cabin, on this frozen morning, it remains the center of survival. You rise to your feet, stretching your stiff legs, and take a moment to watch the fire settle into its steady rhythm. Each crackle echoes softly through the room. The shadows shift along the walls. Light glows in the hollows between logs, and the cold, though still present, steps back just a little. Tonight, when darkness falls again and the wind returns with its long, icy fingers, you will sit here repeating these motions, just as every settler did, tending a fire that barely keeps the cold at bay, but doing it anyway, because warmth does not come freely in the Wild West. You linger near the fire until the warmth fades from your fingertips, then stand slowly, stretching your back as another faint chill coils through the room. The day has moved forward, chores have scattered people across the settlement, but you can already sense the long winter night lurking at the edge of the horizon. Nights here are not gentle. They are something you prepare for with the same seriousness as preparing for a storm or a hunt. And part of that preparation means deciding who will stay awake to keep danger at bay. You walk toward the door and open it just enough to peer outside. The sky has shifted to a pale, metallic blue, a color that always precedes bitter cold. The wind drags snow across the ground like drifting smoke. You feel it sting your face, then slip back inside quickly, pushing the door closed with your shoulder. The wood thuds softly, rattling the chinking. Inside, the cabin seems darker than before, as though the light outside is too weak to reach the corners of the room. Someone nearby is sharpening a small hatchet, the rhythmic scrape of metal on stone filling the silence. That sound reminds you that winter nights were not just about keeping warm, they were about staying ready. A commonly cited settler account describes families taking turns staying awake during the darkest hours, rotating quietly so that at least one person tended the fire and listened for wolves, coyotes, or two-legged trouble. The Wild West was unpredictable, and winter amplified every threat. You sit down near the door, imagining yourself taking the first watch. You picture the room at night, lit only by the faint glow of embers, shadows stretching like long fingers across the walls. The air inside would be so cold that breath hovered in front of every sleeper, yet you would be awake, wrapped in a thick coat, listening to every creak and whisper. You glance toward the window covering. The oiled cloth flutters slightly, pushed inward by the wind. The draft grows stronger, chilling your cheek. A curious and rarely mentioned frontier trick involved stuffing the edges of window coverings with dried moss before nightfall, creating a temporary seal. Whether this method came from observing local tribes or simply from experimentation is still discussed among researchers studying everyday pioneer habits. You sit with your back against the door, adjusting your coat around your shoulders. The room feels different when you imagine being the lone watchkeeper. Even the fire seems to inhale more deeply, drawing your attention with every pop and crack. You rest your hands on your knees and picture the tasks required. Turning logs in the hearth, checking for glowing edges, breaking twigs into kindling, and keeping the flame from dying. A night watch was part duty, part meditation, and part endurance. Behind you, the cabin grows quiet. You can almost hear the settling sound of bedding as people lie down, preparing for another freezing night. If this were truly winter, bodies would be pressed tightly together under layers of hides, quilts, and rough wool. Some would fall asleep immediately, exhausted from endless labor. Others would drift towards sleep slowly, startled awake by every new sound outside. You imagine hearing a distant howl, perhaps a single note at first, rising from the plains, then a chorus. Wolves were both feared and respected. They rarely attacked cabins, yet their presence signaled vulnerability. A well-known frontier story recounts a family who kept their fire blazing brighter than usual after hearing wolves circle the property. Whether the wolves truly meant danger or simply followed instinct is unclear, but for families who had only wood and hide between them and the cold night, fear felt real enough. You adjust your posture and lean closer to the hearth. Even with the fire burning, the air remains sharp. You hold your hands over the flame until the heat begins to sting your palms. Then you step back, letting the warmth sink into your bones. Firekeeping was a skill learned early. Children often practiced blowing gently on coals, learning to judge when a flame needed coaxing. Some families kept ember boxes, small wooden or clay containers filled with ash that insulated a single glowing coal until morning. Scholars of domestic life still debate how widespread these ember-saving tools were, though several have survived in museums. You stand again, walking slowly toward the darker end of the cabin. Each step echoes softly on the earthen floor. The room feels larger when everyone else is imagined asleep. You sense every sound more acutely, every movement of wind outside, every shift in the wooden walls. It is easy to understand why the watchkeeper sometimes hummed quietly or whispered prayers to stay alert. A few personal letters from the era mention that people occasionally recited memorized poems or sang low melodies to keep from dozing off. You return to the door and rest a hand against the cold wood. You picture the hours passing, one after another. Midnight arrives, with a deeper silence. The world outside freezes harder, making every distant crack of ice sound ominous. Somewhere beyond the cabin, a fox might dart through the brush. Snow might fall silently, thickening the landscape. The fire burns lower and needs attention again. You poke the embers carefully, making them glow red like tiny stars. A faint warmth touches your face, but the room stays frigid. Then comes the hardest part of the night, the time just before dawn. It is the coldest stretch, the one that feels almost personal, like the winter itself is testing your determination. Your body aches with fatigue, your eyelids grow heavy. You shift your weight, pacing a few steps to stay awake. The sleepers behind you form a single rhythm of quiet breaths, and for a moment you envy them. But someone must keep watch. Someone must protect the fire and the family. You imagine the moment when a soft rustle signals your relief. Another person rises from the bedding, bleary-eyed and wrapped in layers, ready to take over. You would trade places, easing into the warmth beside the sleeping forms, your body surrendering instantly to exhaustion. The fire would continue its quiet battle. The watch would continue. The cycle never truly ended, not until winter loosened its grip. You step back from the door, brushing a lingering chill from your sleeves. The cabin around you feels smaller now, but also more familiar. You have lived, briefly, as the night watcher, and in doing so, you understand how fragile and resilient life on the frontier could be at the same time. Tonight, if the wind howls and the fire flickers, you will remember the rhythm of this silent duty, the way settlers fought the winter, not through grand heroics, but through long hours of watching, tending, and waiting for dawn. You step away from the door and rub your tired eyes, imagining how heavy they would feel after a night spent listening for every whisper of the wind. The fire glows gently behind you, casting an amber light across the bedding piled in the corner. As you walk back toward that bundle of quilts, hides, and straw, you notice something new tucked beneath a folded blanket, a lumpy, uneven mattress that looks both inviting and uncomfortable at the same time. You kneel beside it and press your hand gently into the surface. It gives way with a soft crunch. Feather ticks, stuffed by hand, were the closest thing many settlers had to a true mattress. According to a frequently referenced 19th century homemaking guide, these ticks were filled with whatever feathers the family could collect, usually from chickens, ducks, or geese plucked during butchering seasons, but even the best of them were far from luxurious. Feathers clumped, shifted, and poked through fabric over time. You smooth your hand along the mattress and feel uneven ridges beneath the cloth. Some spots feel flat, others puffed. The sensation reminds you of the way old couch cushions sag unevenly. A curious detail preserved in a few household letters explains that children often helped shake the mattresses every morning, gripping each end and snapping them briskly to redistribute the stuffing. Whether this practice was entirely effective or just a hopeful gesture is still questioned among those who study everyday domestic routines of the time. You sit down carefully and let your weight settle. The feathers shift beneath you, rustling softly like dry leaves. The sound makes you smile, even though the texture feels unpredictable under your hips. You lean back slowly, testing how much support the mattress offers. It dips first on your left, then your right, adjusting itself like a creature waking reluctantly. Frontier families accepted these quirks. A mattress that shifted was still far better than bare planks or frozen earth. You lie down fully, feeling the tick embrace your shape in its uneven way. The faint odor of feathers reaches your nose, mingling with the constant presence of wood smoke in the cabin. You stare up at the ceiling beams as you imagine a room full of sleepers, each one sprawled across a mattress like this, adjusting their limbs through the night, when a clump of feathers shifted under a shoulder blade or a sharp quill poked through the fabric. Near your head, you notice a small basket that holds extra feathers. You pick up a handful, letting them drift through your fingers. They are soft but inconsistent. Some are fluffy, perfect for comfort. Others have stiff quills that feel more like tiny darts. A well-known domestic record from the era notes that families removed these sharper quills whenever possible, but it was nearly impossible to avoid all of them. A tick was a living thing, in constant need of tending, shaking, repairing, restuffing. You tuck the feathers back into the basket and adjust the blanket beneath you. The mattress responds by shifting again. You feel a slight ridge at your lower back, and when you push down gently, the feather clump slides away. This small interaction helps you understand a quiet truth. Settlers made peace with discomfort. Comfort was not the goal. Warmth and rest were, and a lumpy mattress provided both better than anything else they had. As you breathe slowly, your attention shifts to the corner of the cabin, where a pile of dried grasses and fabric scraps sits waiting. Some families used grass-filled ticks instead of feathers, especially when birds were scarce. These grass mattresses wore out more quickly, flattening into rough mats that needed refreshing often. One account hints at families spreading grass across the ground outside during warmer months to dry, turning it by hand before stuffing it into mattress covers. Whether this routine was universal or dependent on regional grasses remains uncertain, though it paints a vivid picture of domestic labor during the season. You close your eyes and imagine the nightly ritual: children shaking the ticks, adults fluffing them with practiced hands, bedding being arranged carefully so that cold drafts could not slip into the spaces between mattress and wall. You see the family settling in, adjusting their sleeping spots with small sighs. You hear the soft rustling of feathers each time someone shifts. These sounds would become the soundtrack of winter nights, familiar and comforting in their own way. You open your eyes again and focus on the feel of the mattress under your shoulders. It is warm now, warmed by your body heat and insulated by the blankets draped across you. For a fleeting moment, the unevenness feels almost friendly, like an old habit one learns to accept. You shift onto your side, and the feathers slide once more, forming a new hollow beneath your ribs. This constant adjustment must have made sleep an unpredictable adventure, yet exhaustion guaranteed that settlers slept deeply whenever they could. As you roll onto your back again, you hear a faint crackle from the hearth. Someone is adding more wood. The flame brightens, throwing flickering light across the mattress. Shadows ripple across the tick, highlighting its puckered seams and loose stitches. You imagine a settler repairing those seams late at night by firelight, working slowly with chilled fingers, trying to stop feathers from leaking out. A few historians have noted that such repairs were often done by necessity rather than tidiness, since a leaking tick could turn the entire cabin into a storm of floating feathers. You stretch your arms and feel the mattress respond beneath you, sighing with another quiet shift. The sensation carries something soothing, something almost nostalgic, even though you have never slept on one before now. The frontier had a way of creating intimacy between people and objects, forging bonds through shared hardship. You sit up slowly, brushing stray feathers from your coat. When you stand, the mattress springs back into its lumpy shape, as if relieved by your absence. You press your palm lightly into one of the high spots and feel it dip, then rise again when you release it. Imperfect, but dependable. This was how settlers slept, on bedding that shifted like drifting snow, arranged in layers of quilts and hides, surrounded by the soft crackling of a fire that was never warm enough. Feather ticks may not have offered luxury, but they offered something more important. They offered a chance to sleep, even when the cold crept through every seam of the cabin. And as the afternoon light dims slightly, hinting at the early start of winter twilight, you understand how grateful anyone would be to return to such a mattress, no matter how uneven, after a long day on the frozen plains. You move away from the feather tick, brushing stray down from your sleeves, and stand in the middle of the cabin, where a faint chill instantly wraps itself around your ankles. The warmth you gathered while lying in the bedding evaporates almost immediately. Out here, cold behaves like a living creature, slipping into every gap, every seam, every fold of clothing. And so the settlers trusted another strategy, one that required no tools or fancy materials, stacking layer upon layer of clothing and blankets until they resembled walking bundles more than people. You run your hands along a row of garments hanging from wooden pegs on the wall: wool trousers, patched skirts, heavy shirts, stiff coats, and even a canvas flour sack repurposed into a hooded covering. According to a widely cited frontier inventory list, families often slept wearing nearly everything they owned, especially during the first winters before they could trade for better materials. The logic was simple: removing clothes only made it harder to warm them again in the morning. You lift a thick wool shirt and bring it close to your face. It smells of smoke and lanolin, a scent that clings stubbornly to fabric in winter cabins. You rub the coarse fibers between your fingers and imagine wearing this to bed, layered beneath another shirt, beneath a vest, beneath a coat. Comfort took a back seat to insulation. The thicker the layers, the safer the night. You turn to the bedding and add more layers to the mattress as if preparing it yourself. One blanket, another quilt, a hide, then another. Each piece stacks like sediment, forming a makeshift cocoon. A curious little practice mentioned in a collection of settler letters describes how families sometimes used empty grain sacks as additional coverings, their tightly woven fabric surprisingly effective at trapping heat. Whether this habit was widespread or simply a clever trick used in certain regions is a question researchers still revisit when examining household inventories. You step onto the layered bedding and feel the weight of it absorb your body heat. It is heavy, almost oppressive, but in a comforting way. As you kneel and arrange the layers, you notice how each textile carries its own scent and texture. Rough wool scratches your wrists. Smooth calico brushes your palm. The bison hide lays across everything like a silent guardian. You lie down, fully clothed, and pull the top hide over your shoulders. Immediately, the layers settle around you, forming a pocket of warmth that grows by the second. The combination of clothing and blankets feels almost like the interior of a burrow. You inhale slowly and detect the faint sweetness of old cotton mingling with the sharper scent of tanned hide. Sleeping fully dressed was a nightly ritual, sometimes even a point of pride. You shift slightly, adjusting the layers, and imagine settlers doing the same, laughing softly as they wiggled deeper into the piles of blankets. But the laughter often hid a more serious purpose. Winter nights could be dangerously cold, cold enough to bite exposed skin in moments. Many documented accounts from prairie families mention waking with frost forming on their eyelashes if they dared leave their faces uncovered. You turn onto your side and feel the layers bunch beneath you. The bedding rustles, shifting with you, creating small pockets of cold between folds. You pull the robe closer, tucking it under your chin. As you do, a memory from one of the older settlers' journals slips into your mind. Some families wrap their feet in cloth scraps, or even spare flour sacks before sleeping. These makeshift foot warmers were surprisingly effective, though nobody enjoyed the stiff scratchiness against their skin. Whether this practice was a daily habit or more of a desperate measure during extreme cold spells continues to be discussed among those studying regional winter customs. Your breathing grows slower as the warmth builds. You imagine the night creeping in from outside, compressing the air so tightly that any uncovered surface would freeze. You picture the wind striking the cabin walls, searching for a crack, and yet here you are, buried under weighty layers, almost insulated from the outside world. You stretch one leg experimentally, feeling the resistance of blankets above and below you. It is like swimming through fabric. Moving too quickly sends cold drafts sneaking into the folds, so you learn to shift slowly, deliberately. The settlers must have known this instinctively, adjusting themselves with tiny motions to avoid losing the precious heat they had built. Lying still, you notice how wearing thick clothing to bed changes the experience. Instead of skin against bedding, you have wool against leather, cloth against cloth. You can almost hear the fibers sliding past each other. A few accounts describe the faint swish-scrape of layered garments during the night, an oddly comforting background noise once you grew used to it. The fire crackles softly in the distance, its warmth barely reaching you through the layers. Frontier families often remark that despite all the blankets and clothing, they still slept feeling cold around the edges. Your neck might freeze while your torso sweated. Your hands might be warm while your feet felt numb. There was no perfect balance, only enough warmth to make sleep possible. You adjust your arm, sliding it under the robe, and feel how quickly the cold retreats from the tucked-in limb. The layers hold heat tightly once everything is sealed. For a moment, the sensation is so soothing that you close your eyes. In the stillness, you hear a whisper of wind outside, threading its way through the chinks in the wall, but it cannot reach you now, not through this fortress of fabric. As you breathe, you picture settlers doing the same. Mothers tucking scarves around their children's necks before bed, fathers pulling coats tightly across their chests, teenagers rolling themselves like burritos in quilts to conserve warmth, entire families becoming bundles of cloth and fur, indistinguishable from their bedding, except for the soft rise and fall of their breath. You push back the top blanket and sit up slowly, letting the cold cling to your cheeks again. That brief warmth, almost like a stolen moment, dissolves quickly once you leave the nest of layers. You feel your skin tighten with the chill. Your body instinctively wants to dive back under, curl up, and pretend the world outside does not exist. Instead, you stand, brushing imaginary snow from your sleeves. The layers behind you settle into a quiet heap, waiting patiently for the next freezing night. This is how settlers slept, fully clothed, fully covered, and fully aware that warmth was never guaranteed. Layers were not simply blankets, they were armor. And as the evening creeps closer, you will need that armor again. You step away from the bedding and wander toward the window covering, guided by a faint rustle in the wind outside. The light has dimmed into the soft silver of late afternoon, that in-between hour when the world seems to hold its breath. As you lift the edge of the oiled cloth and peer out, you see the plains stretching endlessly, white and quiet, as if tucked beneath their own blanket, yet the silence is deceptive. Out here, sound travels far in winter, carried across snow and frozen grass like a whisper, with somewhere urgent to go. You let the cloth fall back into place and listen. At first you hear nothing, then a faint creak, a low moan of wood reacting to the temperature, followed by a distant crack that reminds you of thin ice breaking somewhere unseen. According to a well-known traveller's account from the 1800s, the vast openness of the plains created eerie nighttime acoustics. Sounds seemed to float across the distance, stripped of their source, leaving listeners unsure whether a noise came from a mile away or just beyond the next drift. You stand perfectly still. The room feels colder when you listen closely, as though your ears invite the night to enter. A thin whistle of wind slips through a chink in the wall, brushing your cheek like a cold fingertip. The sensation makes you exhale sharply. You begin to understand why settlers often talked about the voice of the plains. It was not poetic exaggeration. At night, the land truly sounded alive. You move closer to the wall and press your palm against it. The surface feels rigid yet faintly trembling from the constant touch of wind outside. A peculiar observation preserved in a handful of frontier letters describes how some families believed the land itself groaned during winter. They claimed to hear deep, resonant rumblings rising from the earth on especially cold nights. Whether these sounds were caused by shifting ice, settling soil, or simply the echo of distant animals remains an unresolved question among researchers who examine environmental acoustics of the era. You lower yourself onto the straw mattress and listen again. This time you hear the soft brushing of snow crystals against the cabin wall. They scrape lightly, like fingers drumming a slow rhythm. You imagine lying here in total darkness, hearing that persistent sound as the wind shifts the snow from one place to another. The plains speak in subtle ways. Settlers learned these languages without realizing it. They knew when a soft brushing meant drifting snowfall, and when a sharper hiss meant a storm was gathering. You close your eyes to sharpen your hearing. A long, hollow wail rises far off to the west. It might be the wind. It might be something else. On winter nights, the difference between the two can be difficult to tell. In fact, one widely circulated frontier recollection mentions that the first settlers sometimes mistook the wind for cattle calling or for approaching riders. Nights were full of illusions that played tricks on exhausted minds. You shift your position, curling slightly under the blanket for warmth. The cabin creaks once more, the sound rippling along the beams above you. Sometimes the creaking grows rhythmic, almost musical, as if the cabin itself is breathing with the wind. You imagine children lying awake, asking their parents whether the building is safe. Most cabins were built to bend, slightly under stress rather than break. That flexibility could be unsettling, but it helped them survive. Then another sound reaches you, a soft pop, followed by a long, dragging sigh. It comes from deeper outside, perhaps from the frozen grass bending under shifting wind. You picture the vast fields stretching in every direction, each blade encased in ice. When the wind moves through them, the plains become an enormous instrument, humming and whispering in ways that can unsettle even seasoned travelers. Settlers sometimes describe these sounds as ghostly, though they rarely meant it literally. It was simply the vibrancy of a land unshielded by trees or hills. With no obstacles, wind had free rein, snow drifted in spirals, ice cracked in long, wandering fractures. The earth and sky conversed loudly, yet no human voice joined them. You pull the hide closer around yourself and tilt your head. A faint rhythm arises, almost like footsteps crunching through snow. The sound grows, then fades. Out on the plains, a distant animal might be moving. A deer, a bison, or perhaps nothing at all, only the wind knocking loose a crust of ice from a frozen ridge. A puzzling note preserved in the writings of an early surveyor mentions that even seasoned hunters sometimes misinterpreted these nighttime sounds, unsure whether they were hearing predators, herds, or simply the cold landscape shifting. That lingering uncertainty colored every winter night. You continue listening. Your breath grows quieter, blending with the sounds around you. A light tapping begins along the roof. Snow, shaken loose, cascades across the shingles with a soft rush. The movement sends a tremble down the cabin beams. If you were trying to sleep, this sound would wake you gently, reminding you that the weight above was changing. Settlers often slept with one ear open, in case the roof creaked too sharply. They knew heavy snowfall could threaten a cabin's structure, especially if the roof pitch was shallow. Then, out of the silence, comes a low, resonant vibration that seems to ripple through the ground. It is not loud, but it is deep, almost like the land is shifting under the frost. You sit up slightly, curious. That vibration could come from far-off thunder rolling across frozen terrain, or it could be ice cracking on a distant river. The plains carry such noises with eerie clarity. Even today, researchers who study natural soundscapes note how winter amplifies low-frequency vibrations across open landscapes. You exhale slowly, letting the sounds wrap around you. The plains at night are never silent. They murmur, crack, sigh, and whisper. The wind weaves in complex patterns. Snow scrapes softly along the ground. Animals cry out in brief, haunting calls. The cabin responds to all of it, shifting wood answering shifting earth. You lie back on the mattress, pulling the blanket close until the cold at your neck retreats. With your eyes closed, the sounds blend, forming a strange symphony of the frontier. If you were drifting towards sleep, this chorus would lull you in uneven waves, soothing one moment, unsettling the next. Every sound carries a story, and every story carries a reminder that the frontier was never truly quiet. When you finally open your eyes, the room feels darker, as if evening has already arrived. You stand slowly, brushing off the straw. Outside, the plains continue their icy conversation. Inside, you feel the cold pulse toward you again. Night will soon take its place at the door. And when it does, the sounds of the plains will surround you once more, guiding you into sleep the same way they guided generations before you. You step away from the window, letting the oiled cloth fall back into place, and turn your attention to the far wall of the cabin. A faint sparkle catches your eye, a thin shimmer clinging to the logs like scattered crystals. You walk closer, and there it is, frost, delicate and sharp-edged, forming on the inside of the cabin walls. Not outside, inside. You reach out with one finger and barely touch the icy lacework before it melts into a tiny cold droplet. Frost indoors was such a common feature of frontier winters that several period diaries mention it almost casually, as if waking to icy walls were no more surprising than waking to dawn. One respected historical account even describes families wiping frost from their bedding before climbing out, the ice having formed where warm breath met freezing air throughout the night. You imagine opening your eyes to find the edge of your quilt stiff with frozen crystals, each breath creating a faint cloud that settles on your cheeks. You drag your fingers lightly along the frost-covered logs. They feel like chilled stone, not wood. The patterns remind you of ferns, or feathers, or tiny rivers frozen mid-branch. The frost forms because the cabin, for all its sturdy appearance, cannot completely keep out the cold. Warm air from the fire mixes with frigid air slipping through the cracks, and the wall becomes a canvas for winter's artwork. As you observe the delicate patterns, you think of a curious little story that surfaces in a handful of family letters. Some children would trace shapes in the frost as if drawing pictures. Whether this was common or simply one family's attempt to bring cheer into a bitter environment remains a question that social historians sometimes debate. You kneel and examine the frost more closely. It thickens near the floor, where cold air pools like water. Your breath forms a cloud that drifts upward, adding another thin layer to the icy sheen. The chill bites at your fingertips. You pull your coat sleeves down farther as you sit on your heels, listening to the crackle of the fire behind you and feeling the cold radiating forward from the wall. You imagine lying here at night, face inches from this frozen surface, the chill numbing your nose and forehead. Many settlers slept so close to the walls that frost occasionally dusted their hair. One commonly referenced homestead memoir includes a memorable line, "Waking up with the wall glittering like a silver mirror." The author meant it literally. With the fire dying before dawn and the temperature plummeting, interior frost sometimes grew thick enough to reflect faint light. You lean closer and see your own blurred reflection in the shimmering surface. It feels both magical and unsettling. The wall almost looks alive, breathing tiny crystals in response to your presence. Outside, the wind moans, and the frost vibrates slightly with each gust. You stand and walk toward the corner where the ceiling meets the walls. Frost has formed there too, though in thinner lines, like delicate spiderwebs spun during the coldest hours. The roof beams creak softly, and another faint dusting of ice falls to the floor, glittering before it disappears into the dirt. You imagine sweeping frost from the cabin floor every morning, not because it was strange or alarming, but because it was simply part of daily life. You place a hand flat against the wood again, testing how long you can bear the temperature. Your palm lasts only a moment before instinct forces you to pull back. Cold radiates through the wall without mercy. To fight it, frontier families used every trick they knew. Some hung spare blankets along the interior walls as makeshift insulation, though this trapped moisture and often created even more frost when temperatures dropped drastically. Others pressed dried mud or straw deeper into the cracks, hoping to block drafts. A few surviving household receipts describe families purchasing small sheets of oilcloth to tack over especially stubborn gaps, though it is unclear how effective this method truly was. You step back and watch your breath drift like smoke. The frost responds instantly, growing slightly foggy where warm air touches it. You picture a child, half asleep, exhaling against the icy wall and watching the frost change shape. Maybe they made animals or letters in it. Maybe they whispered at it, pretending it could hear. But frost was not charming, not really. Thick ice inside a cabin signaled that despite the fire, despite the bedding, despite the layers of clothing, the cold still held power over everything. Families sometimes woke shivering violently, their blankets stiff with ice. One recorded winter account claims that water inside a tin cup froze solid overnight, while resting only a few feet from the hearth. Whether this was exaggeration or literal truth varies depending on which historian you ask, since interior temperatures could fluctuate dramatically based on cabin design and weather conditions. You walk back toward the bedding and pick up a heavy quilt, draping it over your shoulders. Its familiar weight drapes warmth over your chest. Settlers often slept with blankets pulled up to their noses, creating a tiny pocket of warm air beneath the fabric, but even that had its limits. The moment you exhaled, moisture from your breath settled on the quilt and eventually froze. Quilts could become stiff in winter, their top layers coated in frost by morning. You sit on the edge of the straw mattress and imagine the night creeping in. You look again at the frost on the wall across from you. It glows faintly in the fading light, catching shadows and bending them into soft shapes. The frost becomes a silent witness to every movement, every breath, every sigh of someone trying to stay warm. You reach forward again, this time tracing a small arc with your finger. The frost melts at your touch and freezes again as the cold rushes back to claim its territory. The land outside may be endless, but inside this cabin, winter is intimate. It touches everything. You lie back onto the mattress and feel the cold rising from the floor once more. Despite your layers, it reaches you. Slowly, persistently, you turn your head to the side and feel a faint draft brush your cheek. That same draft kisses the frost on the wall, thickening the crystals piece by piece. The fire crackles, snow taps faintly on the roof, and the frost grows in silence. You pull the blanket tighter around yourself and stare at the frozen patterns. They look beautiful, almost otherworldly, but they represent the constant struggle settlers faced each night. Frost was the signature of the winter frontier, both a warning and a companion, both a threat and a reminder of the harsh beauty surrounding these cabins. As you rise once more, brushing straw from your clothes, the frost glimmers in the corner of your eye, quietly reclaiming the space you briefly warmed with your touch. Tonight, when the fire dims and your breath thickens in the darkness, the frost will return to the walls, rebuilding its fragile kingdom while you sleep. You brush the frost from your sleeves as you step toward the hearth again, drawn now not by warmth, but by the small pile of stones arranged near the fire. They look ordinary at first glance, rounded and grey, the kind you might find beside a creek or scattered along a prairie trail. But these stones carried a quiet significance in winter cabins. They were the settlers' version of bedtime technology, simple but ingenious, capable of transforming a freezing night into something just barely survivable. You crouch beside the hearth and pick up one of the stones. It is cold, smooth, and surprisingly heavy. You place it near the fire, nudging it closer until the edges start to absorb the heat. According to a commonly referenced homestead guide of the era, families would tuck heated stones into their bedding before lying down, letting the trapped warmth seep slowly into their quilts and hides. The idea was not new. It had older roots in European households. But out here on the plains, it became essential. You reach for the iron tongs and shift a second stone closer to the flames. This one is darker, with tiny mineral flecks that sparkle when the firelight touches them. As it warms, condensation beads on its surface and evaporates almost instantly. You imagine a settler doing this every evening, carefully selecting stones that would not crack or explode when heated. One curious detail appears in scattered frontier letters. Some families swore by river stones, believing they held heat longer, while others insisted that stones gathered from sun-baked hillsides were the best. Whether either belief was rooted in consistent results or simply habit remains uncertain among those who study household traditions of the time. You lean closer to check a stone that has been heating for several minutes. Its surface radiates gentle warmth, not too hot, not scorching, just warm enough to be comforting. You lift it carefully with a scrap of folded cloth, feeling the heat seep through the fabric. It reminds you of holding a mug of hot cocoa on a winter morning, except this heat feels more primal, more necessary. You carry the stone to the straw mattress and nestle it beneath the buffalo robe. The warmth spreads instantly across the bedding, melting away the chill that had been clinging there. You press your hand against the fur, and the heat rises through it in a slow, soothing wave. You imagine crawling into bed and curling your legs around that warmth, feeling it pulse gently against your skin. Then you return to the hearth for another stone. As you pick it up, its heat burns slightly through the cloth. You shift your grip, amused by the idea that settlers sometimes burned their hands doing this, too impatient or too tired to wait for the stones to cool properly. A humorous but somewhat odd account from one pioneer woman recalls a night when her husband placed a stone that was still too hot into their bed, scorching part of their quilt and leaving both of them scrambling in the dark to smother the smouldering fabric. Scholars of frontier domestic life still differ in opinion over whether such stories represent common mishaps or isolated blunders enhanced by memory. You place the second stone near the head of the bed, tucking it beneath a quilt. The added warmth makes the entire bedding area feel more inviting. You test the spot with the back of your hand. It feels like a patch of sunshine hidden beneath the layers, gentle and steady, slowly radiating into the surrounding fabric. You can picture a family climbing into bed after a long day of labor, sighing gratefully as their chilled feet touched the warmed area first. You nestle a third stone into the bedding and sit down at the edge of the mattress, watching the steam rise faintly from the fur as the warmth spreads. The sensation is so pleasant you cannot resist lying down, just for a moment, letting your back sink into the softened hide. The warmth under your spine feels surprising, almost luxurious compared to the usual chill. Your eyes drift upward as you relax. The firelight dances on the ceiling beams, shaking slightly each time the wind brushes the cabin walls. You imagine the stones continuing their slow release of heat through the night, cooling gradually until dawn. Settlers often reuse the same stones for weeks or months, rotating them in and out of the fire. In some households, children were responsible for fetching fresh stones every few days, selecting ones that felt smooth and solid, free of cracks that might cause trouble later. You lift one edge of the robe, letting a wave of warmth drift up. The contrast between the heated bedding and the icy air above it is startling. You feel warmth on your chest and cold on your nose at the same time. Many first-hand accounts mention this exact sensation, describing it as oddly soothing, half freezing, half thawing, drifting between discomfort and bliss. You lie still for a while longer, quietly absorbing the warmth. Your mind wanders to the nights when storms raged outside, thunder vibrating through frozen ground, wind battering cabins as though testing their resolve. On nights like those, heated stones mattered even more. They kept families from shivering too violently to sleep. They kept joints from stiffening. They kept spirits from collapsing under the weight of relentless winter. You shift slightly and feel one stone through the bedding, its heat dimming now but still noticeable. You press your toes toward it and find immediate comfort. You imagine children doing the same, nudging their feet toward the warmth in their sleep. Perhaps a family dog curled itself around another stone, unwilling to share with its human companions. Some households even warmed small wooden boxes filled with coals or embers, sliding them under beds. Whether these ember boxes were truly practical, or more of a risky experiment, varies depending on which surviving accounts one reads, but the creativity shows how desperately settlers sought heat. You open your eyes again and push yourself up slowly. The warmth clings to you for a moment, before the cold reasserts itself around your shoulders. You wrap the robe around your torso and step back toward the hearth. The fire burns brighter now, sending light across the frost that never fully melts. You gather the remaining stones into a small pile, preparing them for the next rotation. In a few minutes, they will be hot again, glowing faintly beneath a layer of soot. You imagine doing this every night for months, the repetition becoming routine, even comforting, a ritual of survival. As you warm your hands once more over the fire, you glance back toward the bedding where the stones hide beneath layers of quilts and fur. You picture a sleeping form curled around that warmth, breathing softly while winter prowls just outside the cabin. Tonight, that warmth will matter. Tonight, the stones will stay with you. You sit by the hearth a little longer, letting the last of the stones warm under the flames before rising slowly. The room feels slightly cozier now, that the bedding holds pockets of heat, but the air beyond those small comforts remains sharp. The window cloth rustles, and the faint moan of the wind returns. As evening tightens its grip on the plains, another reality of frontier nights slips into focus. Sleep rarely came peacefully. Out here, fear and imagination often climbed into the blankets beside you. You walk toward the darker end of the cabin, where the shadows collect first. The corners feel deeper now, stretched by the fading light. You sit on the straw pallet, pull a quilt over your lap, and listen. Outside, something howls across the frozen grass. It is a long, wavering sound that rises, dips, and rises again. Wolves were a constant part of the winter soundscape, their calls echoing eerily across the plains. According to one oft-cited settler journal, the first howl of a night could silence an entire cabin as everyone strained to hear whether it came closer. You lean forward slightly, drawn toward the sound. There is nothing soft or comforting about it. It seems to thread itself through the chinks in the cabin wall, curling into the room like a cold thought. You imagine lying in bed, hearing that call while the fire collapses into faint embers, and wondering how far away the pack truly is. You breathe quietly, as though not to attract attention. Another sound joins the night chorus, sharper this time, a distant bark or yip, perhaps a coyote. The settlers knew their voices intimately, yet even seasoned frontiersmen admitted that the night could distort familiar sounds. A curious recollection preserved in a family letter describes how certain cries seemed to change pitch as they moved across frozen ravines, making predators seem far closer or farther than they really were. Whether this acoustic illusion happened regularly or only in specific conditions is still a topic of discussion among researchers who examine winter sound patterns on open terrain. You adjust the quilt around your shoulders and shift into a more comfortable position. The mattress rustles softly beneath you, and the warmth from one of the heated stones radiates faintly through the layers. But even with the warmth, sleep does not come easily when the wind howls and the world outside feels predatory. You lie back and close your eyes briefly. Immediately, the distant howl stretches into your mind, blending with memories of stories you have heard about the frontier. Nights when wolves circled livestock pens. Nights when settlers swore they heard heavy footsteps near the door. Nights when the cabin walls shuddered under gusts strong enough to masquerade as something breathing outside. When you open your eyes again, the cabin seems dimmer. The fire flickers low, and shadows ripple across the ceiling beams. Night has arrived. You hear the wind squeeze itself through a crack near the wall, letting out a soft whistle. You tuck your chin deeper into the quilt. Settlers often spoke openly about nightmares during winter, being trapped in snow, hearing the cries of lost travelers, feeling something unseen moving through the dark. Exhaustion played a part, but so did the landscape. One frequently referenced medical note from a frontier physician mentions that sleep was often uneven and restless during severe cold spells, with people waking repeatedly in fear or confusion. This, the doctor suggested, stemmed from the body's instinctive response to low temperature and constant auditory triggers. You sigh softly, adjusting the quilt as if preparing for sleep yourself. The mattress shifts beneath you again, and you feel the faint but reassuring presence of the warmed stone beneath the layers. You press your hand into it, letting the heat seep into your palm. As you lie still, the wind outside picks up, rattling the window frame. Snow scratches along the wall. The whole cabin seems to hold its breath. Then, just as you begin to relax, a dull thump sounds from somewhere outside. Not loud, but distinct. Your pulse jumps slightly. It might be a branch falling, or a chunk of snow slipping from the roof. But at night, any unexpected noise feels significant. Many settlers described this exact moment in their recollections. The sudden, sharp sound that snaps you awake from half-sleep. Even if it turns out to be nothing, it stirs the imagination. Was it a wandering animal brushing the side of the cabin? Was it the wind tossing debris, or something else entirely? The answer often remained unknown, leaving families to fall asleep with more questions than certainty. You roll onto your side, tugging the quilt up to your ear. The fire crackles again, offering brief reassurance. The stone beneath your knees warms you from below. Slowly, your breathing steadies, but then another sound slips into the darkness. This time it is softer, stranger, almost like something dragging across snow. The sound fades quickly, but it lingers in your thoughts. You imagine the settlers lying just like this, eyes wide open in the dark, trying to determine whether they should wake someone else or keep their fears to themselves. A few households told stories of vivid nightmares during winter storms, tales of ghostly figures crossing the plains, of lost voices calling from beneath frozen drifts, of familiar faces appearing at the window only to vanish when approached. Whether these stories were sincere experiences, dreams born from isolation, or simply attempts to pass the time on long nights, is uncertain. Some scholars of folklore argue that such tales reflect the psychological toll of frontier winters, rather than literal sightings. You shift again and exhale deeply. The wind howls once more, long and mournful. You pull the buffalo robe tighter around your shoulders and nestle your feet toward the warmest spot on the mattress. The fire, now burning low, casts a faint orange outline around the room's edges, just enough to keep complete darkness at bay. Your eyelids grow heavier, but even as you drift towards sleep, you remain aware of the plains outside. A distant crack, a shifting gust, a faint cry. Nighttime never lets you forget where you are. Every sound from the land enters the cabin, reminding you that life here is precarious, suspended between safety and exposure. In this half-dreaming state, you imagine a pack of wolves trotting across the frozen grass, their silhouettes barely visible under the moon. Their paws crunch softly through snow. Their breaths rise like mist. They pause sometimes, listening, watching, searching. You inhale slowly, then let the breath slip out. You close your eyes again. The warmed stone beneath you has cooled slightly, but still radiates a gentle heat. The quilt rests heavy across your chest. The cabin continues its chorus of creaks and murmurs. And far outside, the planes keep singing their haunting winter songs. You drift somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, caught in that quiet space where the world softens yet remains alert. This is how many settlers slept. Lightly, tensely, but deeply enough to survive the night. And as your breathing slows, you know the night is still young. More sounds will come. More chills will creep through the walls. But for now, wrapped in layers of warmth and listening to the rhythm of the frontier, you allow yourself to rest. You wake from that half-sleep with a stiff neck and a lingering sense of alertness, the kind that clings to you after a night of strange noises. The fire has dimmed again, leaving only a halo of red beneath the ashes. Your breath floats visibly as you sit up, pulling the quilt around your shoulders. But now another problem nudges you fully awake, one that every settler dreaded during winter nights: the outhouse. You stand slowly, feeling the cold air gather around your ankles first, then climb up your legs. The moment you shift aside the blanket, the chill settles on your skin, as if it has been waiting. The cabin's interior is cold, yes, but what waits outside is far worse. The outhouse stands several yards away, down a narrow trail carved through the snow. You picture it in your mind, a small wooden booth, drafty, creaking, and absolutely unavoidable. You move toward the door, bracing yourself. One of the most frequently mentioned hardships in frontier memoirs is this exact ritual, bundling up for a midnight visit to the outhouse. People joked about it in letters, but always with the tone of someone who found no humor in the moment itself. A well-known settler diary notes that the distance to the outhouse always felt longer at night, as if the snow deepened and the wind strengthened just to spite anyone attempting the trip. You grab your coat from a peg and push your arms through, wincing as the cold fabric touches your skin. You pull on your boots next. They feel hard, almost frozen. As you tighten the laces, you picture countless others doing the same thing in the dead of night, mumbling to themselves about the misery of winter as they tried not to wake their families. Before opening the door, you pause, listening carefully. The wind has quieted a little, but not enough to be friendly. The cabin walls give off faint creaks, tiny sounds that echo the cold settling deeper into the logs. You tuck your chin into your coat collar and push the door open. The world outside hits you instantly. It feels like stepping into a basin filled with ice. The air slices along your cheekbones. Your nose stings. Your eyelashes collect tiny crystals as you blink. For a moment, you cannot move. Then you force yourself forward, stepping into the snow. The crunch beneath your boots is deep and sharp, the kind of sound that only frozen ground can make. You walk slowly at first, letting your eyes adjust to the night. The moon spills pale light across the plains, turning everything metallic and still. It is beautiful in its own harsh way, but that beauty does nothing to soften the cold. You make your way toward the outhouse path. Snow drifts along the sides, piled higher than your knees. A curious detail found in several regional homestead records describes families packing snow down each day to maintain a trail. If they did not, the drifts could erase the path entirely overnight. Whether this task was rotated among family members or assigned to a single unlucky soul varied from cabin to cabin. You take another step. Snow creaks loudly beneath your weight. Somewhere far across the plains, an animal cries out. A short, muffled call you cannot identify. You pause, listening. The plains always sound different in the cold. Sharper, closer. Even harmless animals can sound threatening when carried by winter wind. You continue forward, drawing closer to the little structure silhouetted against the pale sky. Your breath fogs and falls. Your fingers burn as if they are growing colder faster than the rest of you. The outhouse door bangs lightly in the breeze, barely held shut by a wooden latch. When you reach it, the smell hits you faintly through the cracks, though the winter cold dulls it. You pull the latch and step inside. It is darker in here, and colder still. The wind does not push as strongly, but the air is so frigid it feels solid. The seat is wooden, unforgiving, and so cold that anyone sitting too long risks numbing more than their patience. One often repeated anecdote from frontier letters mentions people warming outhouse seats with a heated stone before sitting, though whether this was a common practice or just a clever trick passed along by a few inventive souls remains unclear among those who study rural domestic habits. You take care of what you came to do, working quickly, shifting your weight from one foot to the other to keep blood moving. Every breath you exhale hits the freezing air and falls like smoke. You feel the cold pressing at your spine, wrapping around your ribs, settling beneath your toes. In a place like this, even the simplest human need becomes an ordeal. You finish and step back outside, inhaling the fresh night air even though it stings your lungs. The moon rests low in the sky, painting the snow in faint silver ripples. As you begin the walk back to the cabin, you suddenly understand why some families kept chamber pots indoors despite the smell. Practicality wins over pride when temperatures drop below brutal. The walk back feels shorter, perhaps because the cabin's warm glow pulls your attention forward. You see the faint flicker of the fire through the oiled cloth window. The sight almost makes you exhale in relief. You pick up your pace, snow crunching quickly beneath your boots. You reach the cabin and slip inside, shutting the door fast behind you. The relative warmth feels magnificent, even though your breath still fogs in the air. You pull off your boots and hang your coat on the peg, listening as the cabin's quiet embraces you again. You return to the bedding quickly, diving under layers of quilts and robes. The cold follows you into the blankets at first, sliding against your legs, pressing into your ribs. But slowly the layers begin to warm around you, shaped by your heat, your breath, your presence. Your toes find the leftover warmth of a stone. Relief spreads. You settle your head, sighing into the fur, and feel your body unwind. But one thought lingers. This ordeal must happen every night, without exception. Nature does not pause for comfort, and the settlers did not pause either. The cabin creaks again. The wind murmurs. Yet now that you are wrapped in warmth, the world feels safe enough. You close your eyes, and the planes breathe outside. You wake later in the night when a deep groan rolls through the cabin roof, a low, unsettling sound that vibrates down into the walls and through the mattress beneath you. For a moment you remain completely still, eyes open in the dim glow from the hearth. Then another groan follows, longer this time, as if something heavy and unseen is slowly shifting its weight above you. It is not an animal, it is the snow. You push aside a corner of the quilt and sit up, rubbing the sleep from your eyes. The warmth you built under the layers slips away immediately, replaced by the cold that hovers over everything like a patient sentinel. You wrap the robe around your shoulders and listen closely. The roof groans again. This time the sound carries a gentle crackle, as though a thick crust of ice is settling downward. According to a widely cited journal from a frontier carpenter, one of the greatest winter fears was heavy snowfall accumulating on the roof of a hastily built cabin. Many first-year structures were not designed to bear hundreds of pounds of compacted snow. Winter storms could crush them if families failed to clear the roof regularly. Settlers lived with the uneasy awareness that the weight above their heads might shift dangerously during the night. You stand and walk toward the middle of the cabin, letting your boots sink softly into the straw on the floor. Your breath clouds faintly in the air. The fire is low again, its embers glowing with a dull orange pulse. Shadows rise and fall along the beams as the flames shift, illuminating the roof in sporadic flashes. You tilt your head back and study the structure. The beams arch across the ceiling, thick but not uniform. They were shaped fast during the building season, cut by hand, often by people who simply hoped the timber would hold together. Between the beams lie wood planks with gaps that widen in the cold. Above those planks rests the snow. You hear another creak, sharper this time. Something slides across the roof. A cascade of loose powder slips downward, creating a soft but unmistakable shushing sound along the outside wall. You imagine inches of snow shifting from one side of the roof to the other, piling unevenly. A curious building note preserved in a set of surviving homestead plans suggests that settlers sometimes placed long poles against roofs so they could scrape snow off without climbing onto slick boards. Whether this method was practical or merely hopeful remains a topic that architectural historians still discuss. You take a step closer to the hearth and poke the coals gently, coaxing a flame back to life. As warmth begins to glow again, you glance toward the bed where the others might be curled under their layers, unaware of the shifting above. You wonder how families decided who would climb out into the storm to clear the roof. Maybe there was an unspoken rule. Maybe it depended on stamina. Maybe it came down to whoever noticed the danger first. You sit by the fire and let the robe fall partly open, letting heat touch your chilled chest. The room brightens slightly in the new light. The frost along the lower logs glimmers faintly. The shadows climb the walls, lengthening with each flicker of flame, but you cannot shake the sound of the roof. Another groan, another shift. You listen carefully, letting your imagination drift to the nights when storms raged without pause, snow piling hour after hour. Wind driving drifts upward against one side of the cabin, pressing them against the roof, forcing the structure to carry uneven weight. Some families had to go outside every few hours during blizzards to prevent collapse. A particularly memorable account describes a man tying a rope around his waist so his wife could pull him back if he disappeared into a drift. You imagine stepping outside into such a storm, snow rising to your thighs, wind ripping at your coat, icy particles striking your face. Clearing a roof under those conditions must have felt like a battle with nature itself. You poke the fire again, watching the flames rise. Then another sound interrupts your thoughts. A deep, hollow thud. This one comes from the far end of the roof, where the weight must be heaviest. The cabin shivers, a faint tremor running through the floorboards. You hold your breath. The sound stops. You exhale slowly but remain tense. The heavy robe around your shoulders feels suddenly small. You sit and listen. Minutes stretch out quietly. Only the crackling of the fire keeps the silence from feeling too complete. You close your eyes and steady your breathing until the tension begins to melt. Just as your shoulders relax, another groan ripples overhead. This time, there is an unmistakable follow-up sound, a trickling rush as snow slides down the roof's slope. It falls in a curtain outside the cabin wall, and you hear the soft thump of it pooling at the base. You walk to the window and lift the cloth slightly. Moonlight gleams across a fresh mound of snow now sitting shoulder-high against the wall. You lower the cloth and step back. Snow piling up against the cabin could trap heat worse than it already was. Some families, according to a commonly discussed set of rural survival notes, deliberately brushed snow away from the walls to prevent dampness from seeping downward and soaking the floor. Others believed snow actually acted as insulation and left it undisturbed. The disagreement remains part of ongoing conversations among environmental historians today, especially when examining how settlers adapted unfamiliar traditions to extreme climates. Another faint shush drifts from above as snow continues to settle. You glance toward the roof beams again. The firelight trembles over them as though revealing their anxiety. Thin frost clings to the edges where drafts sneak through. You rub your hands together and press your palms near the fire. The warmth helps, but you know the roof still needs attention. You weigh the imaginary decision, stay inside and hope the snow continues to slide off naturally, or step outside with a pole or shovel to push some of it down. Most settlers had to choose based on instinct. On nights with light snowfall, they trusted gravity. On nights with heavy winds, they took action. You sit down again, wrapping the robe tightly around your shoulders, and let your eyes drift closed. You picture a man climbing onto a snow-slicked roof, a woman shouting warnings from below, a child holding a lantern that flickers wildly in the wind. You imagine hands freezing on wooden handles, boots slipping, bodies bracing against gusts. You open your eyes and listen once more. The roof is quiet now. The earlier sounds seem distant, as if the weight has shifted enough to ease the strain. You let out a sigh, relieved but still aware that winter is far from over. Frost creeps along the windows again. The wind's rhythm softens. The fire glows brighter after you place one more log onto the embers. You return to the mattress and slip beneath the layers. The warmth you left behind has not entirely vanished. Your body finds it quickly. You curl your legs toward one of the stones that is still faintly warm. The roof groans faintly again, but this time it sounds more like settling than warning. The shadows sway gently on the ceiling. The frost glitters faintly. The fire whispers softly. Tonight, the roof will hold, but you will still sleep lightly, listening to every creak, every shift, every quiet reminder that the snow above remains a watchful presence. You lie under the blankets for a while longer, letting the fire coax you back toward a softer rhythm of breathing, until a steady tapping pulls you from that fragile calm. It is not the roof this time. It comes from the small square window, where the oiled cloth hangs loose in its frame. A persistent rattle, a tug of wind, a tiny flutter that grows with each gust, as if the night itself is impatient to slip inside. You push back the blankets, rise slowly into the cold air, and walk to the window. The cloth trembles against the wooden frame, lifting at the corners. You press your palm flat against it, feeling the night wind thrum like a heartbeat on the other side. Windows like this were hardly windows at all. In the early days of settlement, glass panes were expensive luxuries, often shipped long distances at costs families simply could not afford. Instead, they used greased paper or oiled cloth, translucent enough to admit weak daylight, but fragile against winter's assault. You run your fingertips around the frame, feeling the draft push through the cracks. A respected frontier building manual from the 19th century mentions that more heat escaped through window gaps than anywhere else in a cabin. The cloth never sealed completely, and the wood around it shrank in the cold. The result was what you feel now, a sneaking coldness, searching the room until it finds exposed skin. You reach for a spare piece of fabric from a peg on the wall. It is thick, coarse, and stiff from past washings. You fold it twice and press it into the largest gap along the window's edge. The draft softens instantly, though not entirely. A curious trick passed along in a few family letters suggests that stuffing the gap with dried moss, or even horsehair, helped hold the cloth tight through the night. Whether this was truly effective, or merely a ritual born from desperation, continues to be a small point of discussion among those who study daily frontier ingenuity. You adjust the cloth again, pulling it tighter, and step back to observe. The window still shivers with each gust, its edges trembling like the wings of a trapped moth. The faint moonlight behind it turns the cloth a pale grey, almost silver. You imagine the sun during the day creating a soft, steady glow, but at night it serves more as a thin barrier between you and the cold. You sit on the edge of the straw mattress again, wrapping a quilt around your shoulders, and stare at the window as the next gust slaps against it. The cloth bows inward for a heartbeat, then relaxes. That rhythmic movement becomes hypnotic, almost like breathing. Yet the draft that slips through reminds you how vulnerable the cabin remains. Settlers learn to live with these windows. They placed their bedding as far as possible from the drafty frames when space allowed, though most cabins were so small that everyone ended up within a few feet of every opening. In fact, a frequently referenced settler account describes how families sometimes hung extra quilts over the window at night, not for privacy, but to stop icy wind from brushing across their faces while they slept. You pull the quilt tighter around your chest and listen to the tapping begin again. The sound is gentle, almost polite, yet persistent enough to keep a light sleeper awake. Many children, according to scattered reminiscences, believe the tapping was caused by spirits or wandering animals. Adults, tired from long days of labor, simply accepted it as one more winter sound to ignore. Though some researchers today point out that the belief in restless spirits may have reflected nightly anxieties more than actual superstition. You stand again and lean closer to the window, letting your forehead rest lightly against the cold wooden frame. The temperature difference startles you. The cabin interior, though frigid by modern standards, feels warm in comparison to the air pressing in from outside. Your breath fogs the cloth, creating a pale circle that fades, reforms, fades again. You move your fingertips across the surface. The cloth is stiff, with cold but slightly greasy from the oil rubbed into it long ago to improve translucency and repel moisture. The texture feels waxy and rough. A faint smell of animal fat lingers in the fibers, making the window seem less like a boundary and more like another piece of clothing stretched too tightly. You step back and lift a corner of the cloth, letting your eyes peek outside. The world is a sheet of white illuminated by moonlight. Snow ripples across the ground in faint waves carved by wind. The horizon disappears beneath a drifting haze. You lower the cloth again, grateful for the fragile barrier. Inside, the fire crackles softly, adding a thin thread of warmth that fails to reach the window. You sit near the hearth for a moment, absorbing its glow, then return once more to adjust the cloth. The tapping continues, quieter now, softened by the wedge of fabric you pressed into the gap. Still, the draft curls around your wrists, thin as spider silk but unmistakably cold. You tug the quilt around you with both hands. Settlers must have grown used to this sensation, the cold sneaking through in tiny threads, like unwelcome fingers brushing along their skin. One cabin-building record mentions that even after adding shutters, blankets, moss, and fresh chinking, some windows continued to breathe cold air all winter long. You settle onto the mattress and recline with your back against the wall. The frost you cleaned earlier has crept back across the surface in delicate patterns. You tilt your head toward the window again. The cloth lifts faintly with the next breeze, then falls. You inhale slowly, letting the cabin's scents surround you. Smoke, straw, hide, wool, and the crisp smell of snow drifting in through the tiny seams. A quiet rattle echoes through the room as another gust pushes against the frame. You feel a chill slide down your cheek. You tuck your hands beneath the quilt. The window continues, its subtle trembling. It is a reminder that the cabin is alive in its own way, shifting and responding to the forces pressing against it. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine how many nights settlers lay awake listening to this same sound. The tapping, the flutter, the draft brushing their skin. Some families slept with their backs to the window, others with blankets pulled so tightly around their faces they left only a small opening for air. A few wrote that they eventually stopped noticing the draft altogether, as if the winter air became just another part of their household. But on the coldest nights, it could not be ignored. The window became an instrument of winter, playing its thin, restless music until dawn. You lean back farther, letting the mattress cradle your spine. The draft continues to dance in its quiet rhythm, but the bedding is warm now, thanks to the heated stones you placed earlier. You rest your cheek on the quilt and let your breathing slow. Even as the window flutters gently, you begin to drift. You feel the cold at your back and the warmth at your front. You feel the cabin breathing around you. Night is deepening. Winter is watching. But you are wrapped, settled, safe enough for sleep. You ease deeper into the bedding, letting the quilt settle around your shoulders, but a soft clatter near the hearth draws your attention back to the dim glow on the other side of the cabin. It is time for the nightly rituals that every frontier household performed without thinking, a sequence of small, steady tasks that signaled the world was winding down. Life here did not offer lazy evenings. Even rest had its preparations. You rise slowly, feeling the cold peel away the warmth you built beneath the blankets, and shuffle toward the fire. The embers glow like sleepy eyes beneath a layer of ash. You kneel and take the poker, stirring gently until the red deepens and tiny sparks jump upward. According to numerous household notes preserved from the era, tending the fire before bed was one of the last essential duties each night. If embers faded too much, the struggle to relight the hearth in the morning could be miserable, sometimes even dangerous if fuel was low. You add a small log, just enough to feed the coals without creating a roaring flame. A faint crackle lifts the silence. You watch the flicker spread, illuminating the nearby stones with a soft amber shimmer. The warmth nudges your cheeks, reminding you how fragile comfort is here. Behind you, the cabin waits quietly. The shadows lengthen across the walls, stretching toward the ceiling beams. The scent of tallow mingles with smoke. A stub of a candle sits on a small table, unused for now. You run your fingertips over its surface, feeling the softened texture of the rendered fat. Lighting too many candles wasted precious resources, so families often relied on firelight alone as they prepared for bed. You take one of the tallow candles and place it closer to the hearth, letting the heat warm its tip. In a handful of frontier diaries, families describe placing candles near the fire to soften them during extreme cold, as the wicks would sometimes become brittle. Whether this method was common practice or simply a clever adaptation from a few households remains something domestic life researchers continue to discuss. You return to the table near the wall, where a bowl and a wooden cup rest. You pour a small amount of warm water into the cup from the kettle near the fire. It smells faintly metallic but still comforting. Settlers sometimes drank a little warm water or broth before bed to steady the body against the night's cold. You lift the cup and sip. The warmth travels down your throat, small but soothing. Near your feet, the floor whispers under the straw scattered across it. You nudge some of the straw aside with your boot, clearing a small patch. Some houses swept the floor every night, pushing dust and debris out the door to prevent pests from settling in the cabin. Others simply shook out their bedding occasionally and called it good. Practicality always beat perfection out here. You cross the room to the peg where spare garments hang. You choose a scarf and wrap it loosely around your neck. One respected homesteading guide from the period recommended wearing something around the throat at night to prevent cold air from irritating the lungs. You imagine children watching their parents wrap scarves on one another before climbing into bed, a small but meaningful act of care. Then you check the door. You slide the wooden latch into place. It thumps softly. The security is symbolic more than functional, but settlers did it anyway. Habit, hope, a reminder that even the simplest barrier was better than none. You step back, observing the room with a quiet appreciation. Everything is in its place. The fire is steady. The door is secure. The bedding is layered and waiting. These nightly routines were the rhythm of frontier life, performed even when exhaustion pressed heavy on every limb. You sit on a small stool near the hearth and let your hands warm over the flame. You close your eyes and listen to the cabin settle. A soft pop in the corner, the rustle of drying herbs hanging overhead, the faint sigh of wind brushing the roof. The narrow room feels like a world unto itself. and yet the vast plains lie just inches beyond the door. You turn your gaze to a small bundle of herbs tied near the mantel. The earthy scent is faint but pleasant. A practice noted in several scattered family recollections describes people steeping herbs in warm water before bed or simply hanging them near sleeping areas for their calming effect. Whether the herbs actually had significant medicinal properties or whether the scent simply soothed weary minds is still a matter of interpretation among those who study frontier folk medicine. You reach for a small piece of dried sage from the bundle and rub it gently between your fingers. The aroma rises warm and earthy, a whisper of comfort. You place it back and rise once more, walking toward the bedding. The mattress greets you with a soft crunch as you press into it. The heated stones beneath the layers have cooled but still offer residual warmth. You lift the robe and quilt, settling into your spot. The layers settle around you, heavy and reassuring. The cabin's cold immediately crawls toward your exposed skin, forcing you to tuck every edge of the blankets tightly. As you lie back, you listen to the quiet ritual of the fire behind you. A log shifts, the embers hiss, the flames breathe in soft waves. The sound reminds you of evenings when entire families gathered around the hearth before sleep, whispering stories or prayers, or simply sitting in silence, sharing the warmth without needing to speak. Some households recited verses before bed, while others sang a short lullaby or hummed softly to children. Whether these habits originated from religious tradition or family custom varies depending on the region and community, and scholars still debate how extensively such practices shaped nightly routines. You shift under the blankets and settle deeper, feeling the cold at your back retreat slowly as your body heat builds. You cross your arms beneath the robe and adjust your legs into a curled position. Curling was practical, reducing the amount of body surface exposed to the cold. Many settlers wrote about instinctively sleeping tightly bundled, knees drawn slightly upward, like hibernating animals. A small crack in the logs allows a thread of icy air to slip across your face. You tuck the robe higher. The scent of sage lingers faintly near your chin. Your eyes grow heavy. These nightly routines, so ordinary yet so essential, shape the lives of frontier families. They prepared their bodies for rest, and their minds for the long stretch of darkness ahead. They did not banish the cold, but they carved a boundary against it, however thin. You breathe in slowly. The quilt warms. The fire glows. The window flutters once more, softer now. Everything is ready for sleep. And as you close your eyes, wrapped in the rituals that settlers performed for generations, the night embraces the cabin gently, settling around it like another blanket of snow. You drift in that soft space between waking and rest, your breathing slow and steady beneath the heavy quilt, when a faint cough from across the room snaps lightly through the stillness. It is thin, tired, and unmistakably human. You open your eyes. Another cough follows, deeper this time, and the sound settles into the cold air like an unwelcome guest. Illness was one of the most persistent companions of frontier winters, always lurking, always waiting for a chance to slip into crowded cabins where warmth and breath mingled too closely. You sit up, pulling the robe tighter around your shoulders, and scan the dim room. The fire has softened into a quiet glow, but its heat is too weak to warm the far corners. You can see the outlines of blankets piled on the floor, each one rising and falling with someone's slow breaths. In the cramped interior, sickness spreads easily. The frontier offered no real separation. Everyone slept close, breathed the same air, shared the same layers of wool and hide. You step toward the hearth and stir the embers to brighten the light. The glow reveals a face near the wall, pale and flushed at the same time. Someone rolls over with a soft groan. According to several well-regarded medical notes from the period, winter coughs, fevers, and chills were almost unavoidable. One person's illness quickly became everyone's concern. Even a simple cold could linger for weeks in the dry, frigid air. You crouch beside the fire and lift the kettle, feeling its warmth. The steam carries a faint herbal scent. Someone must have brewed a simple remedy earlier: chamomile, mint, sometimes willow bark boiled in water. Frontier families relied on whatever they could gather or store. You pour a small amount into a wooden cup and carry it across the room, kneeling beside the blanket where the coughing persists. You whisper gently and place the cup near the sleeper's hand. They shift slightly, murmuring, but drift back into a light doze without waking. Ill people often slept more fitfully during winter nights. A few preserved frontier recollections mention how entire families stayed awake, tending to one another, trading sips of warm water, adjusting blankets, whispering prayers under the low glow of embers. Researchers today still debate how much these care routines were rooted in folk tradition versus practical necessity, though both surely played their part. You return to your spot by the fire and sit, wrapping your arms around your knees. The room feels smaller now, as though the mere presence of illness compresses the space. The sound of the wind dims, the cabin listens, every sleeper breathes in the same tight world. You stare at the frost creeping back across the logs. Moisture from human breath condenses there each night, forming delicate crystals that shimmer briefly before melting again from the fire's heat. This constant cycle absorbs warmth from the room and returns it as cold. When someone is sick, that additional chill can worsen everything. You shift closer to the hearth and place another small piece of wood on the coals. The flames brighten, offering a momentary sense of reassurance. A soft stirring from the bedding catches your attention. A child shifts, curls into a tighter ball, tucked beneath quilts that look far too heavy for such a small form. You watch the tiny movement and imagine how many parents worried endlessly over children during winter. With little access to reliable medicine, they used whatever they knew: warm compresses, herbal tea, whispered reassurances, and constant monitoring. A common practice recorded in multiple family correspondences describes parents placing warm cloths on children's chests and backs to ease nighttime coughing. Whether this actually helped or simply brought comfort remains a gentle point of discussion among those who study early home remedies. You stand and move toward the stacked blankets. The air is cold here, so cold your breath condenses instantly. You reach down and adjust a quilt around the child's shoulders. The fabric is rough but thick. You smooth it carefully, mindful not to wake the little sleeper. Their breathing steadies, soft and rhythmic. As you rise, another cough echoes faintly. You feel it in the room's bones, a reminder that winter takes its toll constantly. You picture a mother sitting exactly where you now stand, waiting through long nights for a fever to break. You picture a father pacing, stepping from bed to fire to bed again. In a cabin of this size, worry spreads as easily as sickness. Every cough is heard, every shiver is shared. You return to your place by the fire and rest your palms over the warmth. The flames cast soft orange shadows that ripple across the floor. The patterns sway as though breathing with the room. You inhale the herbal scent still lingering in the kettle. Sickness was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a steady intrusion that weighed down the air, chased away rest, and reminded families of their vulnerability. A faint rustle at the edge of the cabin suggests someone else shifting in discomfort. The sound is subtle, but in a quiet room like this, it echoes. You close your eyes briefly, imagining settlers lying awake, listening for any sign that a loved one needed help. Some accounts describe how people took turns sleeping lightly, ears tuned to every small change in breathing. Others wrote about the helplessness of watching illness spread and doing all they could with what little they had. How widespread these nightly vigil habits were remains a point of discussion among historians who analyze family roles on the frontier. The fire's warmth begins to lull your senses. You sit back on the stool and stretch your legs. Your shoulders relax, but just as your breathing steadies, the coughing returns. Softer this time, but persistent. You rise again, cross the room, and check the blankets. You adjust a fold here, tuck an edge there, smoothing the covers with careful hands. The sleeper's brow is warm, not dangerously so, but enough to stir sympathy. You sit beside them quietly for a moment, listening to their breaths settle into an uneven but slowing rhythm. The room stays silent, except for the faint crackle of fire and the gentle whisper of wind outside. Winter nights were often spent in this exact balance of rest and vigilance. One moment drifting toward dreams, the next pulled back by the needs of someone inches away. You return to the fire once more. Your knees pop as you kneel. You stir the embers again, unwilling to let the warmth fade. You breathe deeply and let the firelight wash over you. The cabin feels steadier now, though the presence of sickness casts a hushed weight across the space. You slip back under your blanket, settling into the familiar nest of warmth. Your toes touch one of the cooling stones from earlier. You draw it close instinctively. The layers surround you, heavy and comforting, and the fire's glow flickers softly through the darkness. A cough echoes once more, faint and weary. You close your eyes, knowing sleep will come in brief intervals tonight, just as it did for so many settlers, sharing their warmth, their breath, and their worries beneath one fragile roof through the longest winters. You settle back beneath your quilt, pulling it up toward your chin, but your gaze drifts toward the wall, where several tools hang in uneven rows. The firelight flickers across them, making the metal gleam faintly. An axe, a long-handled knife, a wooden mallet, a small hatchet with a handle so worn it shines. In the daylight, they are only tools. At night, though, when the planes whisper outside and the cabin grows still, they become something more. Every settler slept with tools within arm's reach, not for convenience, but for protection. You push yourself upright again, curiosity urging you toward the wall. As you stand, cold air pools instantly around your ankles, creeping upward like rising water. You cross the short distance and wrap your fingers around the handle of the hatchet. The wood feels smooth, polished only by countless hands. According to a highly regarded frontier manual, most settlers kept at least one sharpened blade close to their bedding each night. Not because danger lurked constantly, but because danger did not announce itself when it chose to appear. You lift the hatchet and test its weight. It is lighter than it looks, yet undeniably solid. You imagine lying in the dark, hearing a strange noise outside, and reaching instinctively toward this handle. It offered reassurance. It offered readiness. But it also reminded everyone of the risks that came with living so far from neighbors, far from help, far from anything resembling security. You replace the hatchet and run your hand over the longer axe beside it. The blade is broad, reflecting a faint shimmer from the hearth. A curious detail mentioned in a handful of personal ranch letters describes men sleeping with axes tucked under their straw mattresses during especially tense winters, believing that a hidden weapon offered the greatest advantage. Whether this tactic was practical or merely psychological remains an open question discussed occasionally by researchers of frontier defense habits. You step back from the wall and sit again on the edge of your bedding. The quilt bunches beneath you as you pull a fold over your lap. Your attention shifts to a wooden club lying near the doorway. It is carved crudely from a single branch, shaped more by necessity than craftsmanship. These kinds of makeshift weapons appeared frequently in cabins during early settlement years, especially in areas where metal tools were scarce. A simple heavy stick near the door meant one more line of defense in a world where help seldom arrived quickly. You pick up the club and roll it between your palms. The texture is rough, uneven, but sturdy. You imagine someone gripping it tight, heart pounding, listening to night sounds they cannot identify. The thought sends a small shiver through your shoulders. Despite the cold, you cannot help respecting the practicality behind every object in this room. You lay the club down gently and return to your blanket, tucking your legs beneath the layers. As you settle, you notice the faint outline of something beneath the edge of the quilt. You lift the fold and find a sheath with a small knife tucked inside. The blade is short, easy to handle. Some families kept knives with their bedding not for protection, but for chores they performed even after dark, such as cutting dried meat or trimming rope near the fire. Others, according to a handful of preserved letters, kept them simply because nighttime chores required tools, and losing time searching for them in the cold was unbearable. The practicality of keeping tools nearby was as real as the fear that stirred people awake in the night. You lie down again, flattening the quilt around your shoulders. The fire crackles with a low, steady glow. Outside, the wind softens into a long exhale. You imagine being here alone, or with only a few family members, listening to unfamiliar noises beyond the cabin walls. You picture footsteps in the snow, slow and heavy, or the creak of wood not caused by cold but by something brushing against the outside wall. Frontier families often learn to distinguish between the playful tapping of a branch and the deliberate movement of an animal. One notable recollection, often quoted in regional histories, describes how settlers memorized the rhythm of their surroundings so well that even a small deviation at night caused immediate wakefulness. Scholars of environmental adaptation point to this as evidence of how attuned people became to their environment when survival depended on it. You reach out and let your fingertips rest on the handle of the knife you placed near your pillow. You do not grip it, you only touch it, feeling its cool surface. It is enough to remind you of what settlers must have felt, a strange mix of vulnerability and readiness. Tools like these were not symbols of aggression. They were security blankets carved from wood and forged from metal. They offered a sense of control in a world that often refused to be controlled. You breathe in deeply, the scent of smoke and cold air filling your chest. Another soft, irregular noise sounds outside, too faint to identify. You freeze, listening. The sound fades. A small rustle travels across the snow, traveling like a thought. You tuck the blanket higher and feel the warmth gather around your neck. You imagine a typical winter night on the frontier. A father sitting up on his elbow, listening hard. A mother lifting her head from her pillow, eyes narrowed. A child clutching a blanket closer, sensing tension even in half sleep. In a cabin like this, fear traveled with sound, drifting like cold air from one person to the next. And yet, life continued. People slept. They had to. You shift your feet beneath the layers and find one of the cooling stones, now barely warm. You rest your toes near it anyway. It feels reassuring. You lie on your side and gaze at the shadows on the wall. The tools hang quietly where you left them, each one motionless, yet somehow watchful. You let your eyes close halfway. The fire dims slightly. The shadows sway. The wind hums faintly outside. You understand now why settlers slept with their tools nearby. Not because danger was constant, but because uncertainty was. These walls were thin, the night was wide, and they carried responsibility for every soul inside the cabin. You breathe slowly, feeling your heartbeat steady again. Your hand drifts toward the quilt's edge. The knife rests within reach. The cabin relaxes around you, and you allow yourself to drift back into sleep, trusting that if the night demands your attention again, you will be ready. You drift back into a shallow, uneasy sleep, the kind that feels like floating just under the surface of wakefulness. But it does not last long. A faint tension threads itself into your chest, a kind of invisible pull. You shift on the mattress, open your eyes, and realize the air feels heavier than before. Not colder, heavier, still, almost too still. You lift your head slightly and listen. Nothing. No wind at the window, no shifting snow on the roof, no distant howl from the plains. The silence feels unnatural, as if the night is holding its breath, and you suddenly understand why settlers dreaded these perfectly quiet stretches of winter. Storms could sneak up during such stillness, gathering their strength out of sight, ready to clamp down on the cabin for days at a time. The long winter storms, sometimes lasting a full week or more, left families trapped inside their homes, with nothing but their thoughts, their chores, and each other's company to fill the hours. You sit up slowly. The blankets slide off your shoulders, releasing a cold that clasps the back of your neck instantly. You rub your arms briskly and glance toward the window. The cloth hangs still, completely unmoving. Even in winter, such moments were rare. According to one respected account written by a frontier teacher, the stillness before a major storm could feel too quiet to trust, like the land was preparing for something. You stand and walk toward the window, gently lifting a corner of the cloth. Outside, nothing stirs. The plains sleep beneath a sheet of white, moonlight trapped in each drifting mound of snow. The sky looks strangely thick, streaked with low clouds. You let the cloth fall back into place. A sudden memory from earlier in the day resurfaces, that eerie vibration you felt deep in the cabin floor, the way the frost clung stubbornly to the walls, the unusual groaning of the roof. Perhaps the storm began forming even then. You turn and sit near the hearth, placing your hands close to the glowing embers. The fire needs more wood. You add a small log and watch sparks leap upward before settling back into the red glow. The warmth spreads slowly across your fingers, soothing them. But as you sit there, the silence presses in again. Cabin fever. The phrase feels more literal out here than anywhere else. A commonly referenced personal letter from a homesteader describes how, during one especially long winter storm, the silence and confinement felt like walls closing inward by the hour. Whether this was simple exaggeration or a genuine psychological struggle is still debated among historians who study mental health on the frontier, but as you sit here in the quiet, you understand how easily the days could blur together. You stand, stretch, and walk toward the center of the room. Your boots crunch softly on the straw-covered floor. You imagine several people trapped in this single room for days, pacing in small circles, telling the same stories over and over, arguing one moment and laughing the next, anything to distract themselves from the endless whiteness outside. You sit back onto your bedding and draw the quilts once again around your shoulders. The weight comforts you, grounding you in the present, but your mind wanders, imagining the hours of boredom and frustration settlers must have endured. No work in the fields, no chores outside the cabin except tending livestock, no sunlight strong enough to warm the walls, just time stretching and stretching, like taffy pulled thin. Children especially struggled with these snowbound days. One family diary mentions how children often grew restless and noisy during long storms, driving their parents nearly mad with pent-up energy. Whether such stories were common or simply a reflection of weary exaggeration remains open to interpretation, but it is easy to imagine small feet pattering restlessly across the packed earth, little voices whispering or giggling under blankets, and parents reminding them again and again to stay quiet so as not to disturb the uneasy sleep of others. You lie down again and curl your knees closer to your chest. The bedding is warm but feels heavier somehow, as though the quiet outside has seeped into the layers. You rest your head on your arm and let your thoughts drift. Storms sometimes arrived with no warning at all. You picture waking to a dull roar overhead, wind slamming the walls, snow piling against the door until it refuses to budge. Settlers sometimes spent entire nights listening to the storm's rage, knowing they might be sealed inside by morning. More than one documented case tells of cabins buried so deeply in snow that families had to dig themselves out with bare hands. Researchers still discuss how often such cases truly occurred, but frontier lore is filled with these moments of entrapment. You turn your head slightly and listen again. Still nothing. The fire crackles softly behind you, but that is the only sound in the world right now. The cold presses forward, as if preparing to settle into every wooden seam. Even the frost on the walls seems quieter, as though pausing its intricate growth. You inhale slowly and pull the quilt up to your chin. Cabin fever was not just impatience or boredom, it was the thick feeling of being trapped between four walls, while the outside world smothered itself in silence. It was the sense that time had stopped, that the night had no intention of ending. Settlers filled these moments with whatever they could, mending clothes, carving small wooden toys, reciting stories from memory, sharpening tools, or simply staring into the fire, anything to keep the mind moving. You picture a mother humming a lullaby softly, even when no one is awake to hear it, a father whittling a piece of scrap wood into a spoon, a teenager staring out the window, watching the sky become heavier by the hour. You shift your weight, push deeper into the warmth, and close your eyes again. The cabin is safe, small, and familiar, but the stillness outside feels immense. You exhale. Another day of winter waits ahead, another night of quiet vigilance, another stretch of time that tests patience more than courage. You tuck the quilt beneath your chin. If the storm arrives before dawn, you will hear it. And until then, you lie listening, wrapped in warmth, while the world holds its breath outside. You doze lightly, drifting in and out of sleep, until a faint grinding sound pulls you awake. At first it is so soft you think it might be your own breathing, but then it grows, turning into a deep, muffled scrape along the lower wall of the cabin. You sit up slowly, heart thumping in your chest, and strain to listen. The noise comes again, heavier this time, like the weight of something pressing against the outside planks. You rise, wrap the buffalo robe around your shoulders, and step carefully across the cold, uneven floor. Your breath fogs as you move. The fire has burned low again, leaving only a faint glow. You reach the wall and press your hand gently against it. Cold, solid, still. Then the noise returns. A slow, dragging pressure that seems to move upward. You step back in surprise, and suddenly you understand. The storm has arrived. Snow is piling against the cabin, climbing up the walls like a white tide. Many old winter journals describe this experience in vivid detail, the unsettling sensation of being buried alive inch by inch. Some families woke to find their doors half blocked, others fully sealed. And in the heaviest storms, the cabins seemed to sink deeper into the white world outside. You pull the robe tighter and move to the door. When you lift the latch and push, it refuses to budge, not even an inch. The cold wood feels rigid beneath your palms. A second push yields nothing. You lean your shoulder against the door and try again, but it remains immovable. Snow holds it shut, packed tight by wind. You step back, exhaling sharply. A practical warning found in multiple frontier accounts mentions never waiting too long during a storm to check the door. If snow drifted too high, it could seal the exit completely, forcing residents to dig from the inside. Whether families truly performed hourly checks or simply relied on instinct remains an open question among researchers who examine household survival strategies. But tonight, the need is real. You kneel near the bottom of the door and feel around for the cracks. A thin draft sneaks through, icy and stiff. You stand again and pull your coat from the wall peg. You slip it on over your robe and move to the window. The cloth rattles loudly now as the wind slams against it. You lift one corner and peer out into a swirling white curtain. Snow dances wildly, twisting in every direction. The ground is invisible. The horizon has vanished completely. The world looks like a blizzard of drifting ash. You lower the cloth and breathe out slowly, watching your breath bloom into the cold air. The storm will not move on quickly. You can sense it in the weight of the wind, in the thickness of the snowfall, in the oppressive quiet beneath the noise. Settlers used to say that some storms felt bottomless. The snow simply kept falling, filling every hollow, burying anything it touched. You walk to a wooden chest near the wall and lift the lid. Inside lies a sturdy shovel, its handle worn smooth. You pull it out and carry it to the door. The idea of digging your way out from the inside feels strange, yet the journals confirm it happened often enough. You wedge the shovel's flat edge between the door and the packed snow outside. You push forward hard. The shovel works only a little, scraping against the compacted drift. The packed snow resists like stone. You push again, harder this time. A small crack forms near the top of the doorframe. A breath of freezing wind slips in, stinging your face. You wedge the shovel deeper. The wood creaks. Snow crumbles inward in soft chunks. You stop to rest, wiping the cold from your eyelashes. You are not trapped, but the storm has made movement difficult. Frontier families often kept emergency tunnels dug out from earlier storms, carving pathways through deep drifts with painstaking effort. A peculiar mention found in one northern homestead letter describes children playing inside such tunnels, treating them like secret passages. Whether this memory reflects a widespread practice or just one family's creativity remains uncertain, but the image lingers in your mind. You poke at the drift again, widening the crack. A gust of wind surges in, carrying loose snowflakes that scatter across the floor in delicate patterns. The cold sweeps over your fingertips. You pull the quilt from the bed and wrap it around your shoulders while you work, but maneuvering the shovel becomes clumsy. You remove the quilt reluctantly and set it aside. After several more attempts, you manage to clear a gap wide enough to push an arm through. You feel the cold from outside bite immediately at your skin. You withdraw your hand and step back quickly, letting the door settle against the pressure again. You breathe heavily, understanding that leaving the cabin right now would be impossible. The snow is too deep, the drifts are too heavy, the wind is too furious. Even opening the door fully would invite a flood of powder into the room. You turn toward the fire and toss a log onto the embers. Flames spark up, shifting light across the room. Your shoulders loosen slightly. The warmth, though faint, is a reminder that even trapped inside, you still have your shelter, your blankets, your tools. You sit on the mattress and pull the robe around yourself again. The heavy layers feel like armor against the cold encroaching through the walls. The storm pounds the roof overhead, sending muffled thuds that shake the beams. Frost grows thicker on the logs, its crystal patterns expanding like tiny winter trees. You lean back and listen as the wind howls in long, mournful streaks, pushing more snow against the cabin. Every few seconds, another wave of powder presses into the wall with a soft thump. The sound becomes a rhythm, steady and unsettling. You breathe slowly, imagining settlers spending days like this, trapped in their own homes, waiting for the storm to pass. They ate sparingly, conserving what little food they had. They told stories, played quiet games, mended clothing, scraped frost from the walls, and checked the roof constantly for signs of strain. Some accounts mention laughter echoing through cabins at times, families finding moments of joy in confinement. Others describe arguments, frayed nerves, and a desperate longing for the storm to break. Whether these reactions reflect universal experiences or varied psychological responses remains a point of interpretation among historians. You shift under the blankets and lie back on the straw mattress, curling your legs toward one of the cooling stones. Despite everything, the warmth lingers enough to soothe. The storm roars outside, burying the cabin deeper into the snow, but inside, in this fragile, flickering haven, you feel a small sense of quiet power. You are still here, still warm, still waiting, and when morning finally arrives, you will dig your way back to the world above. The storm's roar becomes the new backdrop of your night, a constant swirling presence pressing against the thin cabin walls. You lie beneath the robe and quilt for a long moment, listening to the muted thumps of snow shifting above you, until another sensation rises gently in your chest. Hunger. Not sharp, not painful, but a persistent hollow feeling, the kind that reminds you how food, like warmth, becomes increasingly precious as winter stretches on. You push yourself upright, pulling the quilt around your shoulders, and walk toward the small table near the hearth. A wooden bowl sits there, covered with a piece of cloth. You lift the cloth and see what remains of a simple stew. Thick, brown, flecked with dried herbs. Its surface has cooled into a soft skin. The scent is faint but comforting, a whisper of nourishment waiting to be warmed. You carry the bowl toward the fire, set it near the embers, and spoon the stew into a small iron pot. As you stir, you imagine the countless frontier nights when families relied on the same mixture. Beans, scraps of meat, dried vegetables rehydrated slowly, maybe a bit of salt if they were lucky. A commonly referenced settler ledger notes that winter meals often tasted nearly identical from one day to the next. Monotony was not a complaint, it was normal. You lean back on your heels, watching steam rise as the pot warms. The scent thickens, and hunger sharpens slightly. You inhale deeply, feeling warmth slip into your lungs. But the hunger is not only yours. Across the cabin, someone shifts under blankets. A child murmurs. A faint stomach growls. Winter changed eating habits. Bodies burned more energy fighting the cold, but food supplies dwindled at the same time. You dip a spoon into the pot and taste the stew. It is simple, earthy, and slightly bitter, but satisfying. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth spread across your tongue. Then a curious memory drifts into your thoughts from a frontier diary. Some families claimed winter dreams were shaped by hunger. People dreamed of roasted meat, warm bread, fields of summer grain. Whether these dreams reflected genuine nutritional cravings or the brain's attempt at comfort is still something food historians ponder gently. You pour a small portion of stew into a wooden cup and set it near the blankets, in case someone wakes wanting a bite. You return the pot to the hearth and sit with your back against the fire's warm stones, letting the heat seep through the thin layers of the robe. The warmth soothes your spine, but your stomach continues its slow, steady ache, not painful, just present. You reach for a small cloth bundle resting on the table. Inside lie hardened biscuits and a few kernels of parched corn. You break off a piece of biscuit and chew slowly. It is dry and requires effort. You swallow with difficulty, then chase it with a sip of warm water. The combination is dull, yet the act of eating sends another wave of calm through your body. You think of settlers who spent entire winters rationing every scrap. One well-documented winter account describes a family stretching dried apples for months by boiling them until they nearly disintegrated, then flavoring each pot of stew with the same handful. Whether this was as common as the record implies, or an extreme case unique to a harsher region, remains debated among researchers studying frontier food scarcity. Your belly warms slightly as the stew settles. The hunger softens, though it does not vanish. Out here, hunger rarely left entirely. It hovered, waiting for its next return. You rise and return the biscuits to their cloth, tying the knot tightly. As you place the bundle back into the chest, you feel the faint cold of the wood beneath your fingers. Hunger and cold, working side by side. They shaped winter life, pressing families into stronger bonds, simply because sharing food meant sharing survival. You move to the bedding again and sit slowly. The straw rustles beneath you. You pull the quilt around your shoulders and let your gaze drift toward the window. Snow continues battering the cloth, but the storm has changed its voice. Less raw now, more steady hiss, as if it has settled into its long work of burying everything outside. You lie back down and feel the warmth of the stone beneath your leg. Its heat has dimmed, but remains pleasant. You close your eyes, letting the quilt press into your chin. The hunger beneath your ribs is no longer sharp, only a dull echo now. Then your mind drifts. The cold, the snow, the long hours trapped inside, the unchanging meals. All of it blends into one rhythmic pattern. Survive the day, eat what you can, sleep as much as the night allows. You imagine settlers lying exactly as you do now, drifting into dreams shaped by hunger, by memory, by longing. One peculiar piece of frontier lore claims that people dreamed of summer fields more vividly during the coldest months, as if the mind summoned warmth to challenge the winter. Whether this happened often or only in a handful of dream-prone families is unclear, but the idea feels strangely fitting. You feel warmth spreading in your imagination even now, as if the stew's heat carries its own quiet dream. You turn onto your side, nestling your knees closer to your chest. The quilt folds softly around your shoulders. Your breathing slows. The storm hisses on, patient and steady. You picture a pot simmering over a fire in another cabin, the scent drifting through smoky air. You picture hands breaking bread, children sipping small portions of broth, a family gathered in quiet gratitude around a bowl that might barely fill them, yet still tastes like hope. Food in winter was not just sustenance, it was comfort, it was ritual, it was reassurance that, despite the cold pressing at every seam of the cabin, something warm still lived inside. You breathe deeply once more. The warmth in your belly fades into sleepiness. The storm hums. The blankets embrace you. You close your eyes. Winter holds the land outside, but the simple memory of hot stew holds you. You lie still for a few minutes, letting the gentle warmth of the stew settle in your stomach when the wind outside shifts once more. This time, instead of the heavy hiss of snow, you hear something lighter, softer. Footsteps? No, not footsteps. More like a faint crunch repeated in uneven intervals. You sit up slowly, drawing the robe across your shoulders, and listen again. The sound comes closer. Someone is walking through the storm. You rise from the bed and move quietly toward the door, each step cautious. A deep instinct settles into your chest. On the frontier, unexpected visitors during winter nights were rare, troubling, and sometimes life-saving. You press your ear against the wood. A muffled call reaches you, shaped by wind and distance. You cannot make out the words, but the tone carries urgency. You unlatch the door and push. It opens only a few inches before hitting the heavy drift outside. Cold air rushes in. Snow spills onto the floor. You grip the edge harder and push again. A figure appears through the swirling white, trudging toward the opening. They are bundled so heavily in coats and scarves that you cannot see their face, but their steps are slow, exhausted. You extend your arm through the gap and wave them closer. It takes effort for them to reach you, fighting the waist-high drift. When they finally stumble against the doorframe, you grab their sleeve and pull them inside. Snow clings to their coat in thick clumps. They breathe in short, ragged bursts. The moment you close the door, the wind's howl is muted, as if you've rescued a sound as well as a person. You guide the traveler to the hearth and help them kneel beside the fire. Many documents from the era describe these moments with quiet reverence. The unexpected knock at the cabin door, the stranger arriving half frozen, the instinctive decision to bring them in without question. Winter forged a kind of solidarity among frontier families, a shared understanding that no one should be left to face the cold alone. You lift the kettle and pour some warm water into a cup. The traveler's hands shake as they take it. Their fingers are swollen and stiff from the cold. As they drink, steam softens their expression. You remove their outermost coat and hang it near the fire to thaw. Their face finally emerges from the scarf. Flushed cheeks, cracked lips, tired eyes. They whisper thanks, though the words barely reach above a murmur. You nod, because hospitality out here was never about praise. It was about survival. You guide the traveler toward the bedding. You move aside a section of blankets and gesture for them to sit. They lower themselves onto the straw with a grunt, relief spreading across their features. You pull a quilt over their legs and tuck a warm stone near their feet. A curious detail preserved in several frontier recollections notes that families often welcomed unexpected guests, even when they barely had enough for themselves. Strangers were offered a place near the fire, a share of food, and sometimes even a spot in the crowded bed. Whether this always arose from pure kindness or from a practical awareness that alliances were important remains open to interpretation among social historians. You set another cup of warm water beside the traveler and return to the hearth. The fire burns brighter now, responding to the new log you add. The room fills with a warm glow that softens the frost along the walls and casts the traveler's shadow long across the floor. They shift beneath the quilt and glance around the small room. You can sense their exhaustion. Their eyes track the slowly cooling stones piled near the hearth, the tools hanging on the wall, the window cloth fluttering slightly. Everything here speaks of endurance, of family, of shelter. You ask quietly where they came from, and they whisper a name, a ranch several miles east. The storm had overtaken them on the trail, and for hours they pushed through blinding snow, hoping to reach a light or sound. The voice breaks as they recount the moment they thought they would collapse before finding shelter. You nod, listening without pressing for more. Stories like this appeared often in winter correspondences, and researchers note that accounts occasionally contradict one another about distances and conditions. But what remains consistent is the emotional truth. Winter humbled even the strongest settlers. The traveler coughs, a deep, shaking sound. You pull another quilt over their shoulders. The warmth from the bedding begins to restore color to their cheeks. You offer them a small piece of the hardened biscuit, softened slightly by the heat of the fire. They eat slowly, but with gratitude. You sit down beside them. The storm continues outside, but the cabin now holds 2 heartbeats, 2 bodies warming the air with slow breaths. The traveler leans back against the log wall and exhales heavily. Their eyes begin to drift shut. You adjust the quilt one more time, making sure the warm stone stays nestled near their feet. For a moment, you watch them sleep. The tension in their face fades. Their breath steadies. They look almost peaceful. A memory surfaces from frontier lore that winter nights sometimes brought strangers who stayed only until morning, leaving as quietly as they arrived. Other times they stayed for days, trapped by the weather, sharing stories and tasks until the storm broke. Whether these guests became lifelong friends or were never seen again varied widely, and scholars still debate the extent to which such visits shaped community bonds. You shift back toward the hearth and lean against the warm stones. The fire flickers, illuminating the traveler's frost-stiffened coat drying beside you. A soft drip of melting snow echoes through the room. The presence of another human changes the cabin's atmosphere. The space feels fuller, warmer, and strangely safer. Frontier life taught families that extra bodies meant extra warmth, extra stories, extra chances against the cold. You pull your own quilt over your shoulders and lie down once more on the straw mattress. The traveler's breathing softens into a steady rhythm that lulls your thoughts. You close your eyes, letting the slow warmth of the room wrap around you. Outside, the storm may bury the world, but inside, within these walls, 2 people share heat, shelter, and the quiet bond formed by surviving another winter night. You wake again sometime later, though you are not sure if minutes or hours have passed. The storm still murmurs outside, but more softly now, as if winter is catching its breath. The traveler lies bundled beneath layers of blankets, sleeping heavily, their breathing deep and even. You sit up, stretch your stiff shoulders, and feel the familiar ache that settles into joints during long, cold nights. Your eyes drift toward the far side of the cabin. There, separated only by a rough wooden partition, stands the small lean-to where livestock would usually shelter. Tonight, though, the animals are not outside. They are indoors. You rise slowly and rub your hands together for warmth. A faint snuffling sound comes from behind the partition. Then, a soft shuffle, perhaps a quiet bleat. You walk toward the corner and lift the cloth that hangs over the entry. Inside the attached shed, the space is dim but warmer than the main cabin. A low lantern burns in a shallow dish of fat, its glow soft and flickering. The warmth radiating from the animals is immediate. A cow lies curled on a thick bed of straw, its body steady as a furnace. Beside it, 2 goats nestle together, their breaths puffing gently into the chilled air. A chicken sleeps perched on a beam overhead, feathers fluffed like insulation. According to several well-preserved farm journals, it was not uncommon for settlers to sleep in the same building as their animals during harsh winters. Livestock generated a dependable heat that often made the difference between shivering through the night and sleeping in relative comfort. Many cabins were intentionally built with small attached sheds just for this reason. You step fully into the shed, letting the warmth ease into your skin. It is a different kind of heat, less intense than the fire, yet more constant. The animals watch you with sleepy eyes. The cow shifts, snorts softly, then settles again. You kneel and press your palm to its side. The warmth is soothing, solid, alive. A curious detail found in a handful of regional accounts suggests that some families even brought pigs or sheep directly into the main cabin when temperatures dropped dangerously low. Whether this was widely practiced or limited to particularly severe winters continues to be discussed among agricultural historians, who note that animal body heat was considered a precious resource long before modern heating existed. You sit beside the cow, resting your back against one of the rough beams. The shed smells of straw, musk, and the faint sweetness of stored hay. The air is warmer here, humid even, as animal breath rises in soft clouds. You close your eyes, just for a moment, and imagine yourself spending the entire night in this space. It would not be unusual. During blizzards, families often rotated sleeping spots, so everyone could spend a night or 2 near the livestock. A mother might sit beside a newborn calf, warming it with her own body to keep it alive. A father might rest near the door, guarding against predators that occasionally prowled close during winter. You breathe in slowly, letting the warmth melt the remaining chill from your fingers. Then you stand and scoop a bit of straw into your hands, fluffing it until it softens under your touch. You spread it near the goats, and one nuzzles your hand as if in quiet thanks. The motion is gentle, grounding, a reminder that even animals endured these nights with patience and resilience. You return to the cabin, ducking beneath the cloth and closing the partition. The change in temperature hits you immediately. The main room feels colder, sharper, as if it forgot how to hold warmth without the help of another living body. The traveler sleeps on, cocooned in blankets, unaware of the chill creeping into the corners of the room. You move toward the fire again and stir the embers. A few sparks rise, bright against the dim. You add another log and sit on your heels, palms stretched toward the growing flame. The smoke curls upward, carrying with it faint hints of sage and dried herbs from the bundle overhead. As the fire strengthens, you glance back toward the partition. For a brief moment, you consider moving your bedding closer to the shed. Many families did exactly that on the worst nights, dragging straw mats and quilts right up to the wall so they could benefit from the animals' heat. A commonly referenced anecdote in rural histories describes children competing for spots closest to the livestock, their parents pretending not to notice even when the cabin smelled unmistakably of barnyard. You smile softly at the thought. You step toward your own bedding and press your hand against the straw. The warmth from earlier lingers slightly, strengthened by the fire now rising behind you. You slip beneath the quilts once more, feeling a comforting heaviness envelop you. The traveler stirs faintly but does not wake. You close your eyes, but sleep does not return immediately. Instead, your mind drifts to how settlers balance their nights. Human warmth on one side of the cabin, animal warmth on the other, both essential to survival. Your thoughts wander back to the shed. You picture sitting again with your back against the cow's side, your breath mingling with its warmth. You imagine the goats shifting softly in their straw, offering the cabin the gift of heat without needing to be asked. A gentle debate exists among researchers who study rural lifeways. Did people grow emotionally attached to their livestock because of these shared winter nights? Or were the animals simply seen as vital resources? The answer likely lies somewhere in between. Tonight, as you think of them breathing quietly just beyond the wall, the bond feels undeniable. Your breathing slows. The fire crackles softly. The storm's voice grows distant. You let the warmth gather around your chest. Tonight, you sleep with the knowledge that the cabin is alive with more than just human bodies. The animals' heat, their quiet presence, their steady rhythms, they fill the night with a sense of companionship older than memory. You exhale gently. The blizzard may bury the world outside, but inside this small shelter, every warm body, human and animal alike, helps carry the night. You wake to a sudden jolt, as if the cabin itself flinched. For a heartbeat you lie still, listening. The traveler breathes softly under their blankets. The animals in the shed shift, but remain calm. The fire has settled into a quiet glow. Nothing else moves. Then it happens again. A hard rattle against the wall, sharp enough to stir the fur of the buffalo robe lying across your chest. You sit upright, pulling the quilt with you, and glance toward the window. The cloth over it trembles violently, not with the steady flutter of wind, with impact. You stand slowly, each step cautious on the straw-covered floor. As you approach the window, the cloth slaps the frame once more. A burst of snow dust sprays inward through the tiny gaps. The storm has changed again. The air outside no longer hisses in gentle curtains. It strikes, forceful and unpredictable, like something throwing handfuls of frozen grit. You touch the window's edge, feeling the vibration echo from frame to bone. A harsh gust slams into the cabin with a thud so solid it shakes the tools on the wall. A frying pan rattles. The shovel near the door slides a fraction across the floor. Several frontier letters tell of nights when the wind became a creature of its own, hitting cabins with such force that families feared the walls would cave inward. This kind of wind was often called a dust devil's winter cousin, because it carried both snow and frozen dirt. Whether this term emerged from one region or several remains an ongoing question among language historians studying frontier slang. You grip the window cloth tightly, steadying it. A smear of icy grit coats its lower edge. When the wind hits again, you feel a sting of particles peppering your knuckles. You lower the cloth quickly and step back. Another sudden blast slams the roof. A handful of loose snow tumbles down the outside wall. Then something else drier, rougher, frozen soil. Bits of prairie earth ripped loose and thrown across the cabin by furious gusts. You move toward the hearth and add a small log to the fire, hoping warmth will counter the cold that leaks instantly into the room. The flames flicker, then rise, casting a golden shimmer along the beams. You kneel and warm your hands briefly, listening to the storm grow wilder. A low, grinding roar rises outside, the sound of wind dragging frozen grit along the ground. It journeys across the plains like a heavy sigh. Then another blast shakes the door so sharply that the latch lifts a fraction before settling back into place. You hurry to it and press your shoulder against the wood for good measure. Standing there, you imagine how a night like this must have felt to settlers with little more than logs and determination between themselves and the storm. One modest newspaper clipping from the late 19th century describes dust-filled winter gusts that carried pebbles capable of chipping windows and bruising exposed skin. Whether such reports were exaggerated or a reflection of particular regions with loose, dry soil continues to be debated by environmental historians, but tonight the idea feels frighteningly believable. You step away from the door and move toward your bedding. The quilt lies in a soft heap. You pick it up and shake it gently, letting the fabric fall over your shoulders. The weight calms your breath for a moment. You settle onto the mattress again but keep your gaze on the window. The traveler stirs. They shift under their blankets and mumble something, half dreaming. You rise and walk toward them, placing a reassuring hand on their shoulder. They relax. Their breathing steadies again. You tuck the quilt closer around their sides. Suddenly, another blast hits. This one rattles the roof beams hard enough to make the lantern in the shed clink faintly on its hook. The cow moos in startled protest. The goats shuffle. You hurry to the partition, lift the hanging cloth, and peer inside. The animals look anxious but unharmed, shifting their weight on the straw. You lower the cloth again and step back into the main cabin. A fine layer of icy dust now glitters near the window. You take a cloth and wipe the surface clean, feeling cold grit cling to your fingers. Settlers often spent entire storms brushing snow and dirt from their floors, trying to keep their limited space livable. Many recalled the frustration of waking to find a thin layer of earth blown inside, as if the prairie insisted on sharing the storm with them. Whether this was a daily occurrence or limited to the harshest storms varies between written accounts, but the reality was simple. Winter carried more than just snow. You kneel beside the window and press the cloth tighter into its frame. The draft shifts. A corner lifts despite your efforts. You wedge another scrap of fabric into place. The wind's howl shifts pitch, slipping into a sharp whistle for a moment before returning to its roaring sigh. You sit back onto your heels and exhale, letting weariness settle into your muscles. The cabin feels both tiny and immense. Tiny in size, immense in responsibility. Every gust challenges your shelter, your patience, your sense of safety. You rise and return to your bedding, slipping beneath the quilt and robe once more. The warmth embraces you slowly. The stone beneath the blankets offers only the faintest heat now, but it's enough to keep the chill from creeping fully into your bones. You lie back and listen to the storm's shifting moods. A harsh rattle, a dull thud, a dragging roar, a shrill whistle. Each sound merges with the next, creating a wild nighttime rhythm unique to the frontier. You imagine settlers lying exactly like this, eyes open in the dark, counting the seconds between gusts, hoping the roof holds, hoping the window stays shut, hoping morning arrives before the wind strips away too much soil or buries the door entirely. You tuck the quilt close beneath your chin. The wind hits the cabin again. The tools on the wall clatter softly. The traveler breathes steadily. The animals shift behind their partition. And you breathe. The storm may rage, but you are wrapped, anchored, and listening. The cabin sways with each gust, but it holds. And in the tangle of sound and silence, you let your eyes close once more. Whatever the night brings, you will meet it warm, alert, and sheltered for now. You wake to a softer kind of quiet, the sort that follows a long night of chaos. The wind has calmed. The cabin no longer shudders under the weight of each gust. You sit up slowly, blinking against the pale light filtering through the oiled cloth window. The storm outside has eased, but the cold remains sharp, clear, and biting. You stretch your arms and feel the stiffness in your shoulders. The traveler is still sleeping beneath their mound of blankets, their breath steady. The animals behind the partition shift softly, sensing the subtle change in the air, and for the first time in hours, The silence feels gentle rather than ominous. You rise from your bedding and walk toward the hearth. The fire is weak again. Only a few red coals pulse in the ash. You kneel, add a small log, and coax the embers until flames grow. Warmth spreads slowly, and you rub your hands together over the fire with a tired satisfaction. Then your eyes drift to the small trading pouch near the wall. Supplies? You cross the room, kneel, and untie the leather pouch. Inside lies a handful of coins, a few beads, some buttons, and a small piece of folded paper listing items you hope to trade for at the next chance. Thicker blankets, a better kettle, maybe even a roll of sturdy canvas to help fix the roof before the next storm strikes. Trading posts were lifelines during winter months. According to a well-known regional merchant's account, families travelled miles through snow to barter for bedding, tools, or even scraps of fabric. They came in small groups or alone, each hoping supplies had not run out. You imagine yourself stepping into one of those crowded winter posts, the air heavy with smoke, voices low but eager, the stove glowing in the centre. You set the pouch aside and walk to the shelf near the door. Several items sit there waiting to be bartered. A few extra tallow candles, a bundle of dried herbs, a hand-carved spoon. Small things, but valuable when winter is long and supply wagons slow. You run your fingers along the spoon's smooth handle and imagine the trading post keeper inspecting it, nodding quietly in approval or shaking his head, depending on standards you cannot predict. You pull your coat from the wall peg and slip it on, testing its weight. It is warm enough for chores, but worn around the edges. The lining has thinned. If you had spare cloth, you could reinforce it. If you had money, you could buy better. But winter rarely gives the luxury of choosing what you want. You accept what you have, as settlers always did. A curious detail found in an old frontier ledger reveals that winter trades were often uneven. People bartered whatever they could spare, sometimes exchanging handmade blankets for flour or candles for a small piece of iron. Historians still discuss how fair or unfair these trades were depending on the region. But one thing is clear: bedding and warm clothing were among the most fiercely sought items. You glance toward the traveller. They begin to stir, yawning softly as they sit up, eyes still heavy with sleep. You offer them a warm cup of broth. They take it gratefully, wrapping their hands around the wooden cup as if afraid the warmth might escape. "You survived the storm," you say gently. They nod. It will be days before anyone travels to the nearest trading post again. Snow must settle, paths must be found, drifts must be shoveled aside. But the thought of that trading post remains, a future promise of better bedding, stronger cloth, and maybe even a thick buffalo robe if fortune smiles. You move to your own bedding and begin shaking out the blankets. The quilt is stiff around the edges where frost gathered overnight. You hold it near the fire to soften it. The buffalo hide warms slowly, its smoky scent drifting upward. You fold it neatly and set it aside. The transition from surviving to preparing is subtle. You can feel it now. Once the storm eases, winter demands that you gather, mend, and improve what you have. One settler's note describes this shift as the winter rhythm waking again. Whether this phrase was literal or metaphorical remains uncertain, but it feels accurate. You are settling into the next cycle of adaptation. The traveller joins you by the hearth, holding their blanket around their shoulders. Their face looks less drained. They ask whether you often trade for bedding, and you nod. Better quilts, thicker hides, sturdier wool. These items were not luxuries. They determined how well you slept, how warm you stayed, how much energy you had each morning. You add more wood to the fire and sit beside them. For a moment, you imagine the interior of a trading post. Shelves stacked with fabric rolls, nails, tin kettles, iron tools, the warmth of the stove at the centre, the low hum of conversation, children pointing eagerly at colourful cloth, parents calculating carefully, deciding which necessities must come first. A small cluster of beads in your pouch might buy a strip of wool, a few candles might earn a small hide, a bundle of herbs might be traded for a nearly worn quilt that you could repair and reuse. The economy of winter was not measured by coins alone. It was measured by creativity, resourcefulness, and trust. You sit back on your heels and breathe deeply. The fire crackles. The cabin warms by slow degrees. The traveller sips their warm broth with closed eyes. The animals shift softly behind the partition. You picture the next trip to the trading post. Snow crunching underfoot, your boots sinking into drifts, your breath fogging with each step. You imagine approaching the post's smoke-stained door, stepping into a room alive with warmth and voices. You imagine untying your pouch, laying out your humble goods, and hoping the keeper offers something fair in return. Perhaps a thick wool blanket, perhaps a sturdy woven comforter, perhaps a pelt warm enough to change every night of the coming winter. You let the image linger, not as fantasy, but as motivation. The fire glows brighter. The storm outside fades to a distant whisper. You look around the cabin, its frost-lined walls, its saving warmth, its worn yet dependable bedding, and feel gratitude settle inside you like a slow, steady breath. Winter is far from over, but better bedding waits somewhere beyond the frozen horizon, and when the path clears, you will go. For now, you lie back beneath the quilt, pull the robe over your shoulders, and let the fire's glow usher you back toward rest. You rest for a moment beneath the quilt, letting the fire warm the space just enough to ease the tightness in your shoulders. The storm's voice has faded into a distant mutter, the kind that lingers after a long night of fury. But as winter quiet settles over the cabin once more, another element of frontier nights begins to make itself known. Not the cold, not the hunger, something softer, quieter, and older than any tool or blanket. Belief. You sit up slowly, the robe sliding from your shoulders, and glance toward the small shelf near the hearth. There, beside dried herbs and a stub of tallow candle, lies a small wooden token carved roughly into the shape of a curled animal. Maybe a fox, maybe a dog, maybe something only its maker truly understood. You pick it up gently. Many cabins held small, cherished objects like this. According to several reliable frontier memoirs, families often relied on spiritual comforts during the darkest winter nights. Bibles, prayer books, carved figures, woven charms, bundles of sage or sweetgrass. Whether these items reflected religious traditions from faraway homelands or practices learned from nearby tribes varies from region to region, and scholars still discuss how these traditions blended over time. You turn the little carving over in your hands. Its surface is smooth in places where fingers have touched it often. Other areas remain rough, as if carved in haste. You place it back on the shelf and take a slow breath. The fire cracks softly, filling the silence with a gentle heartbeat. You lower yourself onto the stool beside the hearth and sit with your palms open toward the glow. The warmth gathers slowly in your fingers, but your thoughts drift beyond the physical comfort. Settlers carried beliefs that steadied them through storms, sickness, and sleepless nights. Some prayed before bed, whispering thanks for small victories. One more day of warmth, one more pot of stew, one more crackling fire. Others repeated quiet mantras or recited psalms, letting the rhythm soothe their tired minds. A few carried charms sewn into pockets or hidden beneath pillows, tiny tokens meant to ward off misfortune. Whether these practices truly offered protection or simply made nights feel lighter remains a question human nature continues to explore. You rise again and walk toward your bedding. As you sit upon the straw mattress, you notice something tucked into the folds of the quilt, a small cloth pouch, light and soft. You lift it open. Inside is a pinch of dried leaves and a smooth stone with a faint reddish tint, perhaps meant as a keepsake, perhaps a protective token, perhaps only a sentimental piece carried from a distant home. Personal writings from the period reveal that such bundles were sometimes placed near children to keep nightmares away or to bring peace during long nights. Whether these practices evolved from cultural memory or simply practical attempts to calm anxious minds is something folklorists continue to discuss. You place the pouch back into the quilt's fold and settle beneath the blankets. The room remains dim, except for the fire's flicker. You pull the robe up to your chin and close your eyes, letting the shadows sway gently across your eyelids. The traveler shifts on the other side of the cabin, mumbling softly. You listen as their voice fades again into sleep, carried on a faint exhale. You imagine how lonely winter nights might feel without the presence of another human voice. Small cabins like this often became havens for stories, prayers, quiet songs, whispered reassurances shared between parents and children. Even for those who lived alone, faith offered companionship. You open your eyes and reach toward the small wooden token again, feeling its smoothness beneath your thumb. You picture its maker carving it by firelight, shaping meaning into wood with careful strokes. Perhaps it represented hope, or guidance, or simply a reminder that their life contained more than cold nights and endless work. Outside, The storm has quieted. The world is blanketed under new snow, heavy and sparkling under a faint moon. You can almost sense the calm settling into the plains. The silence is thick but peaceful now, not tense as before. You lie back, staring at the rafters. Shadows drift across them like dark clouds passing overhead. You inhale deeply, feeling your body relax into the mattress. Beside you, the pouch rests near your elbow, a tiny anchor of comfort. You whisper something, maybe a prayer, maybe a quiet thought meant only for the winter night. The sound disappears into the cold air, absorbed by the logs, the blankets, the frost along the walls. You turn onto your side and pull the quilt up to your ear. A faint warmth gathers beneath the layers. The fire continues its steady pulse, and you feel the cabin breathing evenly now, as though its heart has slowed after a long, exhausting ordeal. Spiritual comfort did not chase away the cold. It did not keep wolves from howling or storms from burying the door, but it steadied hearts. It kept hope alive. And as you nestle deeper into your bedding, you understand why settlers trusted such rituals. Winter was too vast, too unpredictable, too quiet at times. Having something small to hold on to, be it faith, a charm, a story, or a song, gave the night a gentler shape. You close your eyes again, letting your thoughts drift between warmth and darkness. The fire crackles. The traveler breathes softly. The animals shift behind their partition. The wooden token rests nearby like a silent guardian. And the long winter night continues, held not just by blankets and embers, but by the quiet strength of belief. You wake again to a faint whisper drifting through the dim cabin, softer than the crackle of the fire, lighter than the shift of straw beneath your weight. At first you think it is the storm returning, but the sound is too small, too warm. You sit up slowly and listen. It comes again, a faint murmur, a child's voice. You turn toward the traveler's side of the room. There, curled beneath a thick quilt, the visitor no longer alone is accompanied by a small figure, a child. The little one must have slipped in while you slept, carried or guided by the traveler after waking from the storm's aftermath. Perhaps they arrived together, but only now has the child stirred enough to speak. Children had their own rhythm in winter nights. According to several well-preserved frontier diaries, some children whispered stories in the dark to soothe themselves or to settle jittery nerves stirred by wind, strange noises, or the heavy silence between gusts. Their whispers kept fear at bay. Their imaginations turned the night into something less vast. You rise quietly and walk closer, careful not to startle them. The child's whispers grow clearer. They talk about the shape of the wind, about how it sounded like a giant breathing outside. They talk about the snow climbing the cabin walls like a cold ladder. Their words are half dream, half story, the kind children weave when fear and wonder mix. The traveler stirs, placing a gentle hand on the child's back. The touch, soft and steady, calms the whispers. You kneel beside them. The child looks at you with wide, tired eyes, still half buried in blankets. Their cheeks are flushed from warmth, their hair tangled. "Couldn't sleep," they mumble. You nod. You understand. Winter nights have a way of creeping inside the mind, especially a young one. The cabin creaks. The fire hisses. Shadows move in strange ways across the rafters. All of it becomes louder in the imagination of a child. You reach for the kettle and pour warm water into a small wooden cup. You offer it to the child. They hold it with both hands, blowing gently across the surface before taking a cautious sip. The warmth seems to settle them. Their shoulders loosen. Their whispering slows. You sit beside them on the straw, pulling the quilt around your own shoulders as well. The child watches the fire. A faint glow reflects in their eyes. The cabin feels smaller now, cozier somehow. In the silence that follows, they begin to speak again. But this time, their voice is hushed, almost reverent. They tell a story. It is simple, with no clear beginning or end, just fragments of ideas. A bison that guarded cabins from storms, a lantern made from a star, a snow spirit who loved to tap on windows but never came inside if people were kind. Stories like this appear in several collections of oral frontier lore. Some came from European folklore carried across oceans. Some were adapted from local indigenous tales. Others were childhood inventions shaped by long nights and flickering firelight. Determining which influences belong to which tradition still inspires debate among folklorists today. The child's story drifts around the room like warm smoke. You lean back slightly, listening. Their whispering voice softens the weight of the storm's memory. Even the traveler smiles faintly, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. You glance toward the window. The cloth no longer trembles. Frost gathers again along the edges, forming pale branching patterns. The silence outside has grown deep and gentle, the kind that follows snowfall as it settles. The child looks at you suddenly. Do you ever get scared at night? You think carefully before answering. Fear was part of frontier life, but so was resilience. You tell them in a quiet voice that even grown-ups sometimes listen to the wind and feel uneasy. That fear is natural when nights are long and storms unpredictable. That warmth, firelight, and company make the fear smaller. They nod, seeming relieved. Children on the frontier learned early that fear did not signal weakness, only awareness. Many historical accounts note that children asked questions like this during winter, seeking comfort from adults in close quarters, where privacy was impossible and conversations traveled freely through the air. The child finishes their warm drink and hands you the cup. You place it aside and tuck them back beneath the quilt. They curl closer to the traveler, who drapes an arm around them protectively. The child murmurs another tiny story, something about a sleeping wolf who guarded travelers during storms until their voice trails off into quiet snores. You rise slowly, stretching your stiff legs, and return to your own bedding. The fire's glow washes softly across the room. You settle beneath your quilt, thinking of the child's stories. Their imagination transforms the winter night into something less threatening. In families with several children, these whispering sessions often spread from one bunk to another, until the whole cabin, filled with soft voices weaving stories of warmth, safety, and magic. Some parents encouraged it, believing it kept children calm. Others pretended to sleep while secretly listening. Whether this tradition was universal or regional remains uncertain, but its emotional truth is undeniable. You lie on your side and gaze across the dim cabin. The child sleeps. The traveler sleeps. The animals rest quietly behind the partition. The cabin feels fuller now, more alive. Winter nights are long, but whispers like these have carried families through generations. Stories soften the cold. Words hold meaning in the dark. You pull your quilt higher and close your eyes. The fire crackles. The frost grows. The silence returns. But now, tucked inside that silence, lingers the gentle echo of a child's imagination warming the night in its own small, powerful way. You rest again beneath your quilts, the faint warmth from the fire lingering like a soft breath against your cheek. But even as you settle, another reality of frontier winters nudges at your awareness. The long nights never truly belonged to sleep alone. There was always work to do, always something to repair or improve before the next wave of cold arrived. Survival meant preparing, even when your eyelids felt heavy. You push yourself upright once more, the quilt falling into your lap, and look toward the corner where the wooden chest rests. Inside lie scraps of fabric, a roll of sinew thread, a few bent needles, and some old leather pieces. You open the chest, lift the small bundle of sewing materials, and carry it to the fire. The flames greet you with a soft glow, enough light to see by, enough warmth to keep your fingers steady. Repairing bedding was an endless task during frontier winters. Quilts frayed, wool thinned, hides split along creases. According to several carefully documented homestead inventories, families mended their bedding so frequently that winter nights often became a quiet workshop of needles, thread, and whispered conversation. The fire provided the only light, flickering across busy hands. You spread one of the quilts over your lap. It is thick, but you see small worn patches where the fabric has thinned, exposing pale filler beneath. You thread a needle carefully, squinting at its tiny eye through the firelight. Your fingers feel stiff, but you manage to guide the thread through. You begin stitching. Slow, deliberate movements, a quiet rhythm, a soft pull of thread. The work soothes you, steadying your breath. A child murmurs in their sleep behind you. The traveler shifts slightly, and the animals in the shed give off faint warmth that settles into the walls. You tie a small knot in the thread and snip the end. The patch looks crude, but sturdiest things on the frontier often were. Perfection mattered far less than durability. Another quilt lies folded beside you, its edges ragged. You lift it and trace the frayed seam with your thumb. Many settlers wrote that patchwork quilts told stories, scraps from old dresses, torn shirts, flour sacks, discarded curtains, pieces of life stitched together for warmth. How widespread this sentiment was is uncertain, but it appears often enough in family recollections to suggest that quilts held meaning beyond their practical purpose. You sew another patch in place, tugging the thread to tighten the seam. The fire crackles softly, as if encouraging your progress. When you finish, you turn to a thick buffalo robe whose underside has begun to split. Leather repairs require care. You heat a small needle near the fire to soften the tough hide. You thread sinew through its point and begin repairing the seam with short, careful motions. The smell of warm leather mixes with smoke and herbs hanging above the hearth. The scent wraps around you like a cloak of memory. You picture families in other cabins doing the same work. Fathers stitching moccasins, mothers repairing quilts, teenagers patching worn coats, entire households turned into makeshift workshops whenever storms forced them indoors. One recollection from a frontier matriarch describes winter nights as our sewing season, claiming the family completed more mending between December and February than during all other months combined. Whether that was true in every household remains a matter scholars still discuss, but the idea certainly fits the rhythm of life out here. You finish the buffalo robe and drape it close to the fire. The newly repaired seam glows slightly in the flickering light. You test it with a gentle tug. It holds. You smile. You reach for a pair of wool stockings next. They are thin at the toes, nearly worn through. You stitch slowly, reinforcing the fabric where it has thinned. Such stockings were precious. A functional pair could mean the difference between frostbitten toes and safe, warm sleep. Your eyes rest momentarily on the child sleeping across the room. You imagine their small feet tucked into stockings repaired by a parent's hands, protected from the cold by threads pulled through fabric under flickering firelight. That kind of love stitched silently through the nights. You return to your work. Stitch, pull, tie. Your breathing matches the slow pace. When the last stocking is mended, you move to the animal shed, slipping through the hanging cloth. The warm air inside greets you instantly. The cow lifts its head, then settles again with a low breath. Straw rustles beneath your feet. 2 goats blink sleepily at you. You kneel and check the small woven blanket draped over the youngest goat. Its corner is frayed. You take out your needle and thread again. Here, beside the animal's steady warmth, mending feels even more intimate. This blanket helps keep the animal alive. Your stitches become part of its winter survival. You finish the repair and run your hand gently along the goat's back. The coarse fur feels warm beneath your palm. Whether settlers formed close emotional bonds with their livestock is something researchers still debate. But moments like this, quiet, caring, necessary, suggest a deeper truth. You return to the main cabin and hang your mending supplies near the hearth. The repaired quilts look thicker now. The patched stockings lie folded neatly. The buffalo robe gleams faintly under the firelight. Your chest fills with a small sense of triumph. These small repairs will matter. You slip back under your bedding, pulling the newly strengthened quilt over your shoulders. It feels heavier, more reliable. You tuck your feet beneath the repaired hide. Your body sinks gratefully into the warmth. The fire crackles. The cabin sighs with settling walls. The wind quiets further. Your eyelids droop. For a moment you lie still, your mind lingering on the thought that settlers stitched their survival by hand, night after night, believing that each patch, each repair, each careful knot helped keep the cold at bay. You drift into sleep again. The quilt holds you, the hide warms you. The stitches bind you to the long tradition of hands working in the night. You ease deeper beneath the freshly mended quilt, feeling every patch, every seam, every line of careful stitching holding warmth against your skin. The fire glows gently, breathing a tired light into the room, and the storm beyond the cabin has faded into a distant hush. You could almost believe winter itself is resting, gathering its strength for the next wave of cold. But as you lie there, drifting in that soft space between waking and sleep, another thought settles quietly across your mind. Not about storms or hunger or tools or drafts. Something older, something quieter, the timeless companionship of dreams. Frontier nights were long, so long that sleep often came in waves instead of one unbroken stretch. You wake, drift, wake again, surrendering to a rhythm shaped by darkness and cold. This time, you rise gently onto your elbow, the quilt sliding off your shoulder, and look around the cabin. The traveler still sleeps, a faint rise and fall beneath their blankets. The child has curled into a tight ball beside them, hair a tangled halo against the straw. The animals in the shed murmur occasionally, shifting into more comfortable positions, and the frost once again paints soft patterns along the logs, shimmering in the faint light. You sit up, stretching, and breathe in the familiar scents of the cabin. Smoke, wool, hide, and the faint herbal sweetness of dried sage hanging above. This is the calmest the night has felt in hours, maybe days. You step quietly to the window and lift the edge of the cloth. Outside, the world is transformed. A pale silver dawn begins creeping across the plains. Snow lies in deep, sculpted drifts. The landscape glows faintly, as though lit from within. You stare at the beauty layered over the harshness, the peace layered over the struggle. Several frontier journals describe this moment with surprising affection, how dawn after a long winter storm felt like a rebirth. Whether every settler felt that way, or only certain poetic souls, is still a point lightly discussed among historians of everyday life, but witnessing the view yourself, it's easy to understand the sentiment. You lower the cloth and return to your bedding, though your mind has already begun drifting. You close your eyes, but instead of sleep, memory and imagination mingle in a slow swirl. You remember the warmth of the stones beneath the quilts. You remember the hiss of wind against the window. You remember the cold bite of the outhouse trip. You remember the thin draft slipping past your cheek. You remember the shared breath of animals through the wall. You remember the traveller stumbling inside, half frozen. You remember the child's whispering stories. You remember the small wooden token resting beside the fire. You remember your hands stitching patches in the firelight. All these fragments settle across you like another layer of blankets, soft and heavy, warming your memory as much as your skin. You lie back and sigh, letting your body sink deeper into the mattress. The straw shifts softly beneath you, and the quilt gathers around your shoulders like an embrace. The fire pops gently, steady and comforting. Somewhere behind the partition, the cow exhales a warm breath that hums through the wall like a contented lullaby. You close your eyes again, and now sleep starts to gather around you, slow and steady, the kind of sleep that feels deserved after surviving a long winter night. Your breathing deepens. The quilt warms with your body heat. Your limbs grow heavy, and slowly, images from the day tilt into dream. But before sleep claims you fully, you take one last quiet moment to imagine what morning will bring. Digging out the door, clearing the path, checking the roof, tending animals, stirring leftover stew, and maybe, and this brings a small smile, sitting for a moment in the rare morning sun before the wind returns. You let that thought linger, then allow yourself to drift. Now your eyes drift open only halfway, the cabin blurring into smoky shapes and gentle shadows. The fire crackles softly, each flame rising like a warm sigh before settling again into the embers. The air feels still, heavy with the calm that follows a storm, and you, wrapped beneath quilts and hides, feel your breath deepen in a slow, soothing rhythm. Outside, the world is silent beneath its blanket of snow, so quiet that even the wind seems to sleep. Inside, the heart of the cabin beats in tiny sounds, the soft whisper of straw shifting, the faint exhale of an animal behind the wall, the quiet settling of wood cooling after hours of strain. Everything eases, everything softens. Your blanket grows warmer the longer you stay curled inside it. The heat gathers around your chest, your arms, your legs, until it feels like a small, private world has formed just for you. Your thoughts move slowly now, drifting like snowflakes falling gently past the window. Light, unhurried, peaceful. You imagine the plains wrapped in dawn light, the sky stretching pale blue across a quiet horizon. You picture the snow glowing like powdered silver. You imagine stepping outside hours from now, boots crunching in clean drifts, the air cold but no longer cruel, a stillness that invites rest instead of worry, a stillness you carry with you now. Breathe in, let it settle, breathe out, let it soften. This night has been long, but warmth held you, stories held you, quiet moments held you, and now, as your breathing slows and your muscles loosen, you sink deeper into comfort, deeper into that soft, drifting space where sleep waits patiently. Let the fire fade, let the frost glow, let the world outside fall away. Rest now. Everything is warm enough. Everything is safe enough. Everything can wait until morning.